The Hagmann and Hagmann Report. It's Friday, April 17th, 2015. That's April 17th, 2015. It's a live broadcast. As always, I'm Doug Hagmann, along with my son Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, live in studio broadcasting. Also simulcast on the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Broadcasting worldwide. Well, from the shores of both shores of the United States, North America, all across Europe and Philippines, Australia, New Zealand. We have people listening live in the UK, in France. It's great to hear from all of you. Thank you so much for your emails. We really do appreciate them, and appreciate you listening. Thanks for deliberately tuning into us, into our program. Our home base on the internet, of course, is HagmannandHagmann.com. That's HagmannandHagmann.com. Before we get started, I'm just so excited. I really am tonight. I'm so excited just to remind everyone that portions of tonight's broadcast, well, they're sponsored by NatureBox. NatureBox ships very tasty, guilt-free snacks right to your door. They've got over 100 flavors to choose from. You can pick from things like Asiago and cheddar, cheese crisps. Oh, fantastic. Perhaps one of my new favorites, I think. Pistachio power clusters, Big Island pineapple. Folks, you'll never get bored. You'll never get tired of snacking again. Try NatureBox for free. That's right, for free. Well, $2 for shipping, but free for the snacks. Go to naturebox.com/CFP-radio. That's naturebox.com/CFP-radio. Alternatively, you can go to HagmannandHagmann.com, scroll all the way down, and click on the link on the bottom left. It takes you to our special world there at NatureBox. It'll say, hey, welcome, Hagmann and Hagmann listeners. Let's get snacking. Then you know you're in the right spot. It's naturebox.com/CFP-radio. I want to welcome everyone tonight. You know, Joe, welcome to the studio once again. It seems like we're rushing all the time, and today was no exception.
Not at all.
No. You know, there's so much going on, so many things taking place. We are processing so much information, so many things about Jade Helm, so many things going on in the financial market, so many people calling, writing with tips, with information. We're trying to connect this mosaic
and
of
phone calls.
I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, I spent most of my day on the phone, which wasn't bad. It was good.
Yeah,
got a lot accomplished, but but it's hard. You get caught up in one thing, and you have 10 other things to do, and you only get the one thing done, and it gets aggravating.
But yeah, it does.
You have to just start a new day tomorrow, I guess.
Well, and that's the thing. It seems like the sun never sets, which that is a good thing. I will say this: we are working on a number of projects that are just we're really taking up our time, and I know I keep saying this, but we're working on some extensive reports that we need to publish. We will publish them.
I was working on my suntan.
Yeah, we're suntan. What's the sun? We haven't seen the sun since Orlando. Or at least it seems that way. Although it is kind of setting now at the studios of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
You gotta love it when it's light for 3-4 extra hours. And
yes. Well,
definitely helps with the energy level, and
that's right.
It's not dark at 5 o'clock. Feel like you're, it's 3 in the morning when you get out. It's a nice change of pace.
That's right. And the snow is finally all gone. And as we were looking out the windows of our studio, as small as they might be, we can see the little glimpses of budding flowers. And you know what, folks? Even as bad as things are and things are going to get, don't we need to kind of just remind ourselves sometimes to stop and admire the beauty of God's creation, admire the beauty, and soak in the flowers. Take your dog for a walk. Enjoy God's creation and give thanks for being alive. And anyway, it's just great, isn't it?
And one thing that I find myself doing is I need to interact and have fellowship and talk with people, because if I get too wrapped up in my own stuff, I can turn into a hermit. And it does help a lot, at least for me, to just take a step back and talk with people.
That's right, and it's important for all of us to do that. We need fellowship. All of us need that fellowship and that interaction with others. And sometimes we can get too introspective and look, folks, things are God is in control. Things are happening at a rapid pace. Now tonight, folks. Before we get into this, I just want to mention I talked to John earlier today. Yesterday, we talked about the giveaway for Greg Jackson's book, 40 Things to Teach Your Children Before You Die.
Yeah, I think I don't know if they announced it yesterday, but the more month than money.
Right.
It was what they were going to call the program.
Well, there was an email address given out yesterday. Actually, sorry about this snafu, wrong email address. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. At the culmination of tonight's show, I'll put the email address up on our website. If you need, if you could use, if you're financially strapped and you would like a copy of Greg Jackson's book, and you can consult yesterday's program, the email address, and this is extremely important, but I will have this up on the website at hagmanhagmann.com. It's freedunhambooks@gmail.com. Dunham is spelled Dunham. That's freedunhambooks@gmail.com. And the other important thing to remember is in the subject line, just type in 40 things. That's 40 things. Okay, 40 things. And
make that announcement for the next couple shows, because if there's people who tuned in yesterday and did not tune in today.
But we want to, we apologize for that little snafu. Things do happen, and I know there is a great response for this, and the publisher, who is actually out of the country in London right now, I guess it was really kind of messed up, so we need to take care of that. So again, freedunhambooks@gmail.com for Greg Jackson's book, 40 Things to Teach Your Children Before You Die. Now, tonight, folks, we had a very special guest, and I remember this so well. She appeared on our show on January 29th. In fact, a link, if you go to hagmanhagmann.com, you can click on the link or click on the top story, and you'll find the links to her previous appearance. What a fantastic author. What a fantastic person. I feel like I have a personal relationship. Although I've never met Rebekah Roth in person, I feel like she could almost be my sister. Now, Rebekah Roth is an author. She's, for nearly 30 years, she served in the airline industry as both a flight attendant and international purser. She was trained as an emergency medical technician and served as a volunteer firefighter. Her expertise and training as a flight attendant gave her that specific ability to research the events of 9/11 with an insider's knowledge, and that eventually led her to discover details and answers to some of those haunting questions about that day. And she writes about it in just in a fantastic form. She writes about it in kind of a novel format in her book titled Methodical Illusion.
Also, her website, methodicalillusion.com.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to tell you, I would consider her book a required reading for a lot of reasons. But here's the great part about it. If you order her book via her website, she'll autograph it for you. And I love autographed books. That's just me. I just love them because it just, I don't know, I've got just this whole section in my personal library of autographed books, and they mean a lot to me because I know the person who wrote the book put a lot into it. And Rebekah Roth, so articulate, so very articulate, and extremely focused. Her book is fantastic. And since her appearance on the Hagmann Hagmann Report, she's appeared, I'm not sure if it's since, but she appeared on Caravan to Midnight with John B. Wells. Fantastic interview. Also, Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. Again, another fantastic interview. She's on Facebook. And her website, as you mentioned, Joe, methodicalillusion.com. She joins us tonight, and God bless her heart, joining us tonight for another round. And we're just so pleased to have her. With that, we would like to welcome Ms. Rebekah Roth. Rebekah, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. You've been on my mind, so I was happy to get this message today. I was like, wow, I've been going to send you an email or something, or phone call or something, and say, hey, we need to get back together and have an update. This has just been the most amazing 4 months of my life.
Well, I can imagine. I hope it's good. When you say amazing, good, correct? I mean, positive.
Oh yeah, it's been crazy. Now I have to tell you, I wrote the book about 2 years ago, and I know a lot of people think I'm kind of psychic because of all those things that were in there, but I let it sit. I just didn't know. Honestly, I just think everything's perfect in God's timing. I was afraid of putting it out. I was afraid of, everybody getting upset with what I discovered. And yet I couldn't debunk my own findings, and I tried real hard. And I just thought, well, I'll just put it out there. And I thought maybe 20 people would read it. And, by the time I edited through and wrote the whole thing and got it all put together, I just didn't think anyone would want to read it. And unlike my own thinking, I guess God's timing is always perfect. And I never dreamed so many people were questioning the official story of 9/11 and ready for this kind of truth. And I'm like I said, if I could have called myself a liar and debunked what I found, I would have. But it's just been amazing. And I have to say this, that your audience has been so amazing. After I did that show with you, I had so many people contact me for, I hope I didn't lose you there.
No.
Okay, just sort of Skype kind of, how it drips and that little silly sound. And I had so many people contact me for autographed books, and I love this because it gives me such a neat connection to the reader. And so what's happened is the book sales have just skyrocketed. And I've had so many people pray for me that I so appreciate that. You have no idea. And they've contacted me by the hundreds. Now, right after we did our show, the end of January, I never mentioned where the planes were taken in any interview. And I got a message from someone that said, you need to contact me. And I did. And it was someone who was based there. And she reconfirmed that, in fact, that base had been evacuated the night before, or early morning of 9/11, and that her reserve unit was called up, and they were denied access to the base for about 2 to 3 days, and they were all put up in hotels, and no one could understand why, including her, until she listened to this interview that we did.
Really? Okay, now, Ms. Roth, okay, just to be clear here, wow. Now, you're talking about the final disposition of the alleged aircraft, or the aircraft that allegedly were hijacked by the 19 Arab hijackers and reportedly striking the Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the field in Pennsylvania. You're saying that the final disposition, was elsewhere, not what we were told. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's correct. And one of the things that I did was I dissected, or a lot of people use the word deconstructed, the day of 9/11, using a 30-year airline career, keeping all of the FAA hijacking protocols that were not followed by any crew member in my head, and putting on my old flight attendant shoes and just walking up that aisle in that hijacking and wondering, what would I have said? Why weren't they saying the right things? Why weren't they showing the hijack code? Why weren't the pilots following hijack procedures? And what happened is I kind of dissected every word that was said that we were told was said, and I found a lot of my information actually in FBI documents, and a lot of it I just found online, on FBI documents actually online from this whole event. And so I knew that cell phones couldn't work at altitude, so I knew they had to be on the ground. And then I found words like the flight attendants from Flight 11. They both called in and referred to the hijackers, one single individual, who initially was reported to be seated at 9B. And then they referred to him just as a he, as one person. And then when they said that he had sprayed pepper spray or mace in business class and they couldn't breathe in business class, I knew that if anybody sprayed pepper spray or mace, they're both illegal to have on board, by the way, and were at that time. The hijackers would have sprayed themselves. The pilots would have been suffering from it, all of the crew members and all of the passengers. So I realized that the planes were no longer pressurized at that point. And so that was about that was about 20 minutes out of Boston. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Just from personal experience, I one time in my life had been inadvertently hit with pepper spray from somebody spraying it at somebody else in a room, a big room. And I can attest, I mean, you cannot, even 10, 20 feet away, it gets in your lungs, in your throat. You can't breathe. You know, your eyes swell up with water. It's a very, for people who have not experienced pepper spray, it's a very potent toxin.
Yeah, exactly.
Substance.
And we had a case, my partner and I had a case when we were doing investigations where the state police came in and it was I hate to use this phrase, but a sting operation. But it was a kind of an enclosed area, and it was by accident one of the officers actually sprayed, and I'm not talking about a lot of pepper spray. I'm just hit the top of the mace pepper spray device, and yeah, I mean you're talking about a little bit bigger than an aircraft cabin, but man, we were gagging. So okay, yeah, all right.
Well,
so,
if you do that the aircraft is pressurized, everyone on board is going to do that. And remember that we were led to believe that the hijackers were in business class, first class, and the cockpit. So of course they would have gassed themselves. And also those two flight attendants, if you'll recall from the story, they were both on the telephone to two different people in their company for 27 minutes. And neither one of them ever complained about the effects of any of pepper spray or mace or coughed. So that told me a lot right there.
With the plane being depressurized, what would trigger that? What would cause that? And what effects would that have on the passengers in the plane?
Well,
once they were depressurized, they were on the ground.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Okay.
And then, Betty Ong went on to say that he stood upstairs, and then that led me to believe that they were no longer, and there are no stairs, by the way, in a 767. They're only in a 747. And so that told me they were in a hangar, because there's stairs in every corner if you've ever been in a large airplane hangar. And their office space is up above, in the upper level. They don't waste that space.
So
that told me two key factors. They were on the ground, and they were not pressurized, and they were probably off the aircraft making those phone calls.
Can you, to the best that you feel that you'd like to, or able, can you walk us through kind of the your scenario as to what might have happened? I mean, again, without to the best that you can, kind of your supposition or your theory. I don't want to use it. Well, theory, I guess, would be the appropriate word here.
That's okay. We can use theory. I call it my discovery. It's not, to me, it's not a theory, and the reason it's no longer a theory, one, I tried to debunk myself, and I'm pretty good at this stuff. And two, since the interviews that I started doing and the book came out, this book has been read by hundreds of airline pilots and flight attendants and pursers and ground people and military and scientists that have contacted me. This is why I say it's just been truly amazing, and they've validated this discovery. It's just amazing. In the second edition, which is the Kindle's in the second edition right now, and the foreword has been written by a retired Boeing 767 captain from United Airlines. And he buys these books directly from the publisher at a great discount and hands them out because that's how sure they are of this discovery. So I try not to use theory. It reminds me of conspiracy theory because I've just had so many of these people that were coworkers from the crew members. And now, the 9/11 truth movement's full of people that don't know how airlines operate. They don't know what a family we are and have had some real cockamamie ideas about the flight attendants were kidnapped in the terminal on the way to the plane, that they didn't exist, they were voice morphed, all kinds of crazy stuff. But what happened is,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've just had lots of their coworkers. Yeah, I've just had lots of their coworkers come forward and tell me who they were, and that's been really interesting. For instance, Betty Ong's friends have contacted me. Talk about Betty, because she's one of the only flight attendants that's tape recorded, and we've got information about that she would never have not followed protocol. She was a by the book girl, and so it's been very interesting to have that kind of stuff come out. I've had scientists, top of the line scientists from this country, try to explain to me without jeopardizing their life or mine the techniques of things such as chemical laser weapons that were used on the towers, things that we don't even know exist. And today there's an article, I think it came out of the Daily Mail in the UK, about the United States having these chemical laser weapons on trucks. There's quite an article about it. But I've already been well-versed on this because there were techniques used, and that's why I think a lot of people try to get into how did the towers, they didn't collapse, we saw an explosion. So how did they do that? Well, it's hard for us to understand how it was done if we don't know that even exists. But now,
true.
15 years later, we're starting to see that maybe those were the laser weapons were just still in testing phase at that time, so we didn't even know they were out there. But they're out there now. They're on airplanes and also ground units now, and they're on the 7th Fleet ships.
And we talked about
chemical
this
laser weapons.
Earlier this week. A caller brought it up, but the extent of the United States Executive Department of Defense and other branches' Space Command programs and the weaponization of space. And this is exactly one of the possibilities and or applications of these weapons.
Yeah. Well, if you can walk us through, go ahead and walk us through your discoveries, if you don't mind. I know that we have a lot of new listeners, a lot of listeners actually who may not have heard your January 29th interview. And I will say this. The January 29th interview you did with us was one of the most popular, most downloaded, and most spread around episodes that we've ever done. And that I just want to say congratulations on your research and your tenacity, and it's just fantastic. So, but if you don't mind, kind of walk us through your discoveries, and thank you for correcting me on that because I don't really like the word theory either. So go ahead. Gonna cut you loose. Go ahead.
It just goes too well with conspiracy nowadays, doesn't it? After a decade after 9/11, and actually lots of other things too. But just in short, I'll touch on some of this because I know we're going to want to talk about some other subjects as well besides the book and how I figured this out. But what I used was, besides a whole lot of common sense in my 30-year career, I used a lot of government documentation from 9/11. I tried to steer clear of real crazy theories from people that didn't understand how it worked. And then just, like I said, walk through what would be going on during a hijacking, what should have been said and done. And since those things weren't happening, I dissected the phone calls that were made, knowing that those calls had to have been made on the ground. And again, most of the phone calls and the phone callers, again, on Flight 175, one passenger, Peter Hansen, he reported that they had sprayed pepper spray or mace in the cabin and that people around him were vomiting and getting sick. Well, that's not usually pepper spray or mace. That's usually some form of nerve gas, hydrogen cyanide, something a little bit more lethal. And he obviously was not getting sick. He was talking to his father. He wasn't gagging or choking. He just reported that people were getting sick and vomiting around him. And it was due to pepper spray or mace. And again, if you spray that stuff, everyone is going to be affected. You're not immune to this if you're a hijacker or if you're a flight attendant or Peter Hansen. So everyone would have been affected by this. And I can't imagine any hijackers wanting to pepper spray or mace themselves in the middle of a hijacking. So these things just don't make sense. And so what I kept doing was dissecting. Peter Hansen also said something else. He said 3 minutes before impact into the South Tower, he was on United 175, supposedly, And he told his father that he thought the hijackers were going to take the airplane to Chicago and fly it into a building. And when I saw that, I thought, now, okay, no American in their right mind, not even a lunatic, on September 11th morning, before they saw what we saw on television, would ever have dreamed that. So it told me somebody had told him the scenario. And then another guy called in, very interesting. He was, he was reported by the FBI as being an F-14 fighter pilot from the Gulf War in 91, trained at Miramar Top Gun School in San Diego. And his friends, he was 6'2", 225 pounds. His friends said he could kill any human being with his bare hands. And yet on 9/11, he chose to sit and do nothing. And at 9 o'clock, 3 minutes before impact, he called his mommy. And his mom asked him, can you tell where you're at? He looks out the window and he says, Ohio. Well, between Boston, which is where this plane took off, and Cleveland, which is pretty close to the eastern border of Ohio, it's an hour and 50 minutes flight. Yeah, if you got some tailwinds, you could maybe do an hour and 40, 45, but not 44 minutes, which is what this aircraft was now sitting at. And he looks out the window 3 minutes before impact in the South Tower. He can't recognize the Hudson River or Manhattan. He thinks he's in Ohio, which is very unusual for a pilot. Well, later on, even after our interview, I believe, I kept researching this guy after the book came out, and I found out that I kept reading that he was a business consultant, and he had, left the Air Force, or I think he was a naval aviator, if I remember correctly. That's what Miramar teaches, naval aviators. And he had left the service, and he was a business consultant. Well, I'm digging through his online obituary. I found out he was working for one of the companies that was helping make things appear and disappear on radar that day for the war games, called MITRE, M-I-T-R-E. And he was actually an employee for them, which I thought was really unusual. But he said something else to his mother, and this is what really was just a game changer for me. He said, now this is about 8 minutes after the passengers know they've been hijacked. He says that a bunch of us passengers are thinking of taking over the cockpit. And let me tell you something, I don't think I really stressed this well enough the last time we spoke. Flight attendants are trained for all emergencies, and that includes hijackings. And if you think you're going to get up as a passenger and try to be John Wayne or Steven Seagal, I got news for you. You will see how abrupt even a 5'4" flight attendant can be to you. We've been trained to handle this. We had specific protocols to follow, code words to use. We knew step by step by step exactly what we would do, and we did that. And the FAA had these protocols in place since the early 70s, so they didn't change much. And they didn't change much for a reason, because they were the protocol set to follow, and that's how we would get the aircraft onto the ground. So the fact that he said a bunch of us passengers are talking about taking over the cockpit told me that somebody told him, remember, that's Let's Roll. That's Flight 93 that went into Shanksville. Someone told him the scenario, too. So I realized, and then I looked back at Betty Ong. One of the things Betty Ong said was, we're the first. And they were the first. They were the first flight out of Boston, the first flight to be hijacked. And how would Betty Ong have known they were the first had someone not told these people the scenario of the day? And so now after the book came out and after I did several large audience interviews, I've been contacted by lots of people that flew with these crew members that knew them well. And collectively, we've come up with this. This is not in the book, though. This is a little bonus for your audience. What we think happened, because you remember the first 3 aircraft that came in, just 2 people were chosen to make phone calls. And on Flight 11, there was nearly 100 people between passengers and crew. So there was a pretty good-sized crowd, but only the 2 flight attendants made calls. On Flight 175, again, there was Brian Sweeney, the fighter pilot, and Peter Hansen. They made calls, also made them at the same time. Flight 77, we came to Barbara Olson, the commentator for CNN, and 1 flight attendant. It wasn't until Flight 93 that things changed and that more people, there was about 11 people that were making phone calls that day on that flight. So here we have a scenario, and since everyone that knew these people has reconfirmed with me that all of the pilots would have fought. They've all were trained as aviators, naval aviators, and they're all trained in combat, and we just wouldn't give up an airplane and our passengers to anybody for any reason. So what we think, remember that day there were over a dozen military war games being played throughout our country. And we think that the handlers on board, there were not, by the way, any 19 Arab hijackers. There were none of them really on any real passenger manifest. And they weren't on the airplane either. But there were specific handlers. These are people that knew the scenario. They knew what was going to play out. They knew we were going to take over the cockpit on one flight. He just didn't have the flight number right. There was an interesting character on Flight 11. He was an anti-hijacking specialist, a hostage rescue specialist, and a trained assassin. Now, this guy, an anti-hijacking specialist and a hostage rescue specialist for a foreign government, would know exactly how a Boeing PA system works. He would know exactly where flight attendants usually keep a cockpit key. He would know exactly how to make an announcement to the passengers, pilots, anyone. So that tells me a lot. There's a very qualified guy on board. And we were supposed to believe that he got killed by a plastic box cutter, but I don't think so. So what I discovered from this, listening to all of these details, were that there were people on board that had been told the scenario that was going to play out that day, and we think they were told that this was part of a drill. And that's the only way the crew members wouldn't have fought them off. Now, since 2 people were removed from each aircraft, the phone calls were probably made, like Betty Ong said, upstairs in an office. And the reason I think this is true is because Betty Ong and Amy Sweeney, the flight attendants on Flight 11, they were giving conflicting information. Betty said she was in 3R, her jump seat, and Amy Sweeney said she and Betty Ong were seated at the second to the last row in coach. Now, you can only be in one place at one time. And it's extremely important, FAA protocol, that you give the exact information. That's why I knew when Amy Sweeney said the hijacker was 9B that she would never have made that mistake. Because here's what we would do in a hijacking. We would do everything we could do to get that airplane somewhere on the ground where we would be coordinating with some sort of SWAT team, some Navy SEALs or Army Rangers. There's somebody's going to show up there that's going to storm the building and do exactly what the passenger on Flight 11 in 9B was trained to do, hostage rescue. That's what would have happened. And so in coordinating a hijacking, getting the plane on the ground, the pilots need to talk to whoever that is. Well, if the pilots can't talk to anybody, then that whole coordination isn't going to happen. Well, the pilots didn't seem to know they were being hijacked either, and even Betty Ong made the statement. She said, I don't know, but we might be being hijacked. And if in a hijacking, you know it, because there's a hijacker standing in the aisle, usually with some sort of weapon, and a flight attendant making a demand. And so you know it. There's no doubt in your mind. So then I started dissecting these details of these phone calls. And then when we get to Flight 93, the Let's Roll flight, that it seems like everybody knew the scenario in those earlier flights. Now, another thing that happened on Flight 77, Renee May, the flight attendant, she called her mom and dad. And let me tell you this, if my daughter called me and told me she was in a hijacking, I would flip out and I'm in control. I've been trained for this for 30 years, but she's my baby. I don't think anyone would do that to their mother, and it's certainly not protocol. It would be the last person you'd want to have involved because parents fall apart. And you would want to, if you were going to make a phone call, actually you wouldn't, but if you did make a phone call, you wouldn't make it to your mom and dad or your spouse. And most of the flight attendants did that. They called their parents or their spouse, and that is absolutely not protocol. That's the last people that you want to get involved. They're emotionally attached to you. And so moms, like that are in their 60s, let's say, find out that their baby's on a hijacking. She's already seen something's happen on television. She's going to completely come unglued. She won't even know what to say. She won't remember your flight number, and nobody would ever do that. And actually, we would never make phone calls. Because if a hijacker, in a real hijacking, if a hijacker were walking down the aisle or saw you with a phone receiver to your ear, he would think you were going to foil his plan, and you'd be dead. So that's not something we would have done. in a
that
real
makes
hijack.
sense. Right, and you know, if you watch, I can't remember. There's a movie about I can picture the actors, but I on a plane, and one of the hijackers smacked around the flight attendant for picking up a phone, between the cabin and the. So yeah, obviously, in training too, you wouldn't do that. Folks, we're talking with Ms. Rebekah Roth. Her website, Methodical Illusion. Visit Methodical Illusion, named after her book too, methodicalillusion.com, and you can visit her website off of Hagmann and Hagmann.com. But it's methodicalillusion.com. Very important information, as well as her Facebook. Very important information on her Facebook page, which we're going to be getting into later. That's really relevant to this topic as well as others. But go ahead, Ms. Roth. Go ahead and continue.
So that's kind of what I did. I just went one by one with every detail I could get from as official documents as I could, from transcripts and tape recordings of the details from all of the phone calls. What happened on Flight 93? Now, Flight 93 had been in the air for about 45 minutes, so definitely it was up at cruise altitude plus. And it actually was, according to the FAA. And most of those phone calls came in reportedly as cell phone calls, which I knew was impossible. It could not happen. Another interesting thing about Flight 93, that one of the passengers, Tom Burnett, he knew 1 minute before the official hijacking took place, before the pilots knew, that the plane was hijacked, and called his wife, and she was a retired flight attendant. And when she looked down at her caller ID and it said Tom's cell, she obviously knew he wasn't on the airplane, and that's exactly what I would think if my husband called me from his cell phone and he was supposed to be in flight. So she answered the phone and said, "Tom, what's wrong? What's going on?" And he then has to tell her something that most of all of the callers repeated was, "We're in the air. We're up in the air. We've been hijacked. We're up in the air." And again, you don't need to tell someone you're in the air in a hijacking. They don't take place on the ground. And the flight attendant said this, passengers said it, and one of the guys even said to his mother, this is the guy that used his first and last name when he called his mom Mark Bingham. He said, "Hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham." And he tells her they've been hijacked and we're up in the air. And he says, "You do believe me, don't you?" And then I got to thinking, okay, somebody's told them that you better convince whoever you're calling that you're in the air. So they kept saying that we're in the air, because the hijacking only takes place in the air. If you were on the ground as a hijacker and a flight attendant saw you were on the ground, we'd arm our chutes and evacuate the aircraft. You'd be right there on the tarmac and run the other way. So hijacking only takes place in the air. That's nonsensical that you would even have to say that. But it's, again, one of those things they kept saying over and over. And this was flight attendants and passengers convincing their caller they were there.
Yeah.
Very
much.
There's
no other explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as Joe said, it does point to a scripted type of situation, I believe. And I've I've flown. Well, the last time I flew was to Montana, and I really, the only time I'll fly is if it's absolutely 100% necessary, because the TSA, was absolutely. But when I was up in the air, I was thinking to myself, what would I do? And so none of the things that happened or allegedly happened, the narrative made any sense to me as I was sitting up at 30-some thousand feet. So, yeah, you're boy, and I was watching the flight attendants and the staff do what they do, and again, it just, none of this made any sense to me. But boy, your book, your accounts, your explanations, your discoveries certainly did make sense to me as I thought through this. Well, now that I've interrupted you.
That's good.
Go ahead.
That's okay. That's totally cool. That's good, because I really wrote this book as a novel to help people understand what did take place from an insider's point of view. And I cannot find any other thing that could have possibly happened as I went through this. And I spent thousands of hours not just researching what happened on the plane and the flight attendants, what they said, what they didn't say, and all the passenger details, but also all the other things that took place on the ground and all of the buildings that were affected and that sort of thing as well. So it's very, very interesting to do. And when I gathered all that information, I thought, my goodness, well, I know most people can't do this kind of research, so I thought, well, I better create a real clever way to let people know that there were things going on that we weren't told about on television. And I got all of my news that day. I was home for 10 days watching it. I got all my news from the media. So I didn't know anything about the Brady bonds or the stolen gold or the insurance fraud or the Enron Global Crossing, WorldCom evidence that was destroyed in Building 7. I knew none of that until I started into this research. And then there was just so many fingers pointing in one direction, which would be that this was very well planned, methodically planned out, actually, which is why I used one of the reasons I used that word. But one of the things that I discovered then, and Betty Ong helped me do that, so I owe a lot of this to Betty Ong. She said something else in her time that she was on the phone, that 27 minutes. She said, we can't talk to the pilots. We can't communicate with the pilots. They're not answering their phone. And that early on in the flight, there's no reason for a 3R to be calling the cockpit, one. So I wondered about that. But two, when she said they couldn't communicate with the pilots, and the pilots didn't squawk 7,500, they obviously didn't know they were being hijacked. And then when she said she didn't know, but we might be being hijacked, I realized that the flight termination system, which is a remote control system, had taken over the aircraft. And now it's interesting that once that happens, and American Airlines referred to theirs as the flight termination system, the flight interruption system. It's actually sold as the flight termination system, and it is how we fly our drones around the world still, as far as I know to this day. The flight termination system was created by a company called SPC Corporation, and interesting connection with that, the CEO at the time of 9/11 was also Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who was the comptroller of the United States Pentagon. And he was actually being investigated somewhat for misplacing $2.3 trillion. And so it's an interesting connection to him because the flight termination system works on the same frequency as a transponder code. So the air traffic control can't see you anymore once the flight termination system takes over. Now, there's a few other things that happen. Once the flight termination system takes over, the pilots can no longer speak to anyone on the ground, in another airplane, air traffic control, or the flight attendants in the cabin, and that's what Betty Ong told me. She said, We can't speak, they're not answering their phone. We can't communicate with the pilots. And I knew that the flight termination system had taken over. The pilots more than likely thought they were suffering some kind of mechanical. And actually the air traffic controllers in Boston Center, which is located in Nashua, New Hampshire, they actually even said to each other and to NORAD when they called us to try to get jets scrambled, which didn't happen, that they thought that the aircraft had a mechanical that was affecting their radio even. And so they knew that they couldn't contact them. But, see, they lost them on radar. They couldn't keep track of them at that point. Once that aircraft then was taken over, it was landed to the location that has been very much reconfirmed as where all four planes were taken. Now, what happened for me is when I discovered this location, for the two flights out of Boston, perfect timing. And then we had to go then check the Newark, and we had to check with Dulles. And within minutes of those aircraft being landed and taken into one of the very, very large hangars at that base, those phone calls were all made. And that would describe why we had people saying conflicting information, and also why people knew the scenario, why Betty Ong knew they were the first, why Peter Hansen said they were going to fly into Chicago and into a building. And,
all right. Wow.
So that's kind of how they did it. Now, there were two companies that were sitting in the FAA headquarters. This is really easy to find this information, called P-Tech and MITRE. And MITRE actually is a radar specialist company. Remember, Brian Sweeney, the pilot, actually was an employee of those. Now, since I've been doing interviews, the wife of the pilot that took the forward seat. Now, he was in an F-14. I guess it's a two-man aircraft. I'm not well-versed on fighter jets. My husband is, but I'm just not. But I guess he was what's called an ROI, I believe, and it's a radar operating person. And he sat behind the pilot. So she told me in email he was not a pilot. I said, well, here's the FAA documents, or the FBI documents. They said he was a F-14 pilot. She goes, my husband was his pilot. And she knew him. And so it was kind of an interesting exchange we had, because then it got to the point where I said, well, he was either a handler or he was told what was going to happen. Because I'm going to tell you again, if you ever think you want to take over in the aisle of an airplane in any kind of emergency from a flight attendant, see how fast you'll be slammed back into your seat, because that's what we do. That's where we shine in an emergency, and that we drill. It's like firefighting. You drill constantly for this kind of stuff, and there's just no way that. And remember, on Flight 93, the crazy scenario was that even a flight attendant called into her husband. She said, Did you hear the news? Have you heard? We've been hijacked. Just like a cheerleader announcing a winning team, right? It was just amazing, the transcript that even the words she used. And he was a pilot for U.S. Air. Sandy Bradshaw was her name. And she says, the passengers are taking pots of hot water and coffee into the cockpit. Okay, so according to the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, that investigated the crash of Flight 93, that aircraft was coming out of the sky 6,000 to 10,000 feet per minute. The aircraft was at a more than 40-degree angle while it was doing that, and at one point while those passengers were running up the aisle, the aircraft was upside down. Now, I'm really good at turbulence. Well, let me tell you something. I'm much smarter than trying to get in the aisle with a coffee pot full of water or anything else, even in the aisle, period, with nothing in my hands, coming out of the sky at 10,000 feet a minute at a 40-degree angle, and I won't even go into the upside-down mode. I mean, it's just ridiculous to believe that story. That is a scenario, and that is the official scenario. They even did a Hollywood movie about Flight 93.
Right,
and I remember. Happened.
You know what, Rebecca? I remember watching that movie with my wife and my father-in-law, and walking out of the theater thinking, man, am I proud. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud, okay, yeah, they got me, okay. So
that's why they did it. And just so you know, yeah, I mean, you're not alone. They got most of the country. I know lots of people that have contacted me that have actually had sons and daughters sign up. They unfurled their flag and signed on the dotted line and went to Iraq and never came home. And now their parents know the truth, and it's very heartbreaking, the things that I've heard. But we all fell for the illusion that they painted. They did a good job until someone started looking closely at these kind of details. They would have probably got away with this. Because if you don't understand how the airline works and how the flight attendants start checking them as a crew member in advance, how we all walk to the aircraft, these are all the things I snuck into the Methodical Illusion subliminally. And a lot of people think, oh, well, I don't want to read this part about these flight attendants. But that's all in there for a reason. When we check in for our flight and we start, checking in 2 or 3 hours before departure, we go down to the office. We all meet each other because we don't always work together. So, I mean, there's, 3,300 flight attendants or so, or 5,000 flight attendants. You don't know who you're going to work with each flight. So we go down and we introduce each other. We talk about FAA things and changes and corporate changes. And then we all get together on the airplane and walk to the airplane together. So we all roll our luggage through the elevator and up through the terminal, and we walk together. That's why when someone said they were kidnapped, I'm like, no way. I mean, that's just nonsense. And so, I put that in the book because one of the times that the protagonist, Vera Hansen, is actually waiting to go down to check in the office, a 757 crew on their way to Las Vegas comes up through with their luggage, and they're all talking about what they're going to do on their layover, and they walk to the aircraft together, and that's all in there for a reason. So you understand kind of what we do, and that is pretty much what we do. In general, that's why you see it always in groups, right? Because we're, we're going to work together. Anyway, that's kind of.
the way that you wrote the book, and folks, Rebekah Roth, a brilliant writer in my view. The way she wrote the book, pay very close attention to the characters. Again, it's written in a novel fashion, but but it's based on actual events. And a lot of the stuff in there, you've got to pay attention to the details because they're critical to the assailing or to the punching the holes in the official narrative. And boy, I couldn't put the book down. I'll tell you that. And then, like I said in the last broadcast, I read it. I think in one sitting. I think he kept me up all night with the book. But okay, go ahead and continue because obviously, with respect to 9/11, the events of that day, now you've created a lot of questions based on these discoveries. I mean, a lot of questions as to, well, if the planes didn't hit the World Trade Center and Pentagon, what did? The disposition of the passengers, the planes, who was behind it, and some of the things you said too. Well, I'll just let you continue. Go ahead, wherever you want to take it.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, let's just chat for a second here about there's one key player, and it's very, very interesting, and this actually kind of relates back even to the German wings crash that just happened. There's an interesting player, the Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who is the comptroller, which means he's the banker of the U.S. Pentagon. He was under investigation. They were really trying to find out where this misplaced $2.3 trillion was. And he also was the CEO of the Flight Termination System company, SPC. Well, he also had a subsidiary company called TriData, and TriData got the contract to repair the World Trade Center towers and had the blueprints after the 93 bombing. They are the only company in the United States of America to this very day that can get those. I've actually talked to Richard Gage, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they cannot get the blueprints for the towers, and they've been gone for 14 years now off the surface of the planet. They're not, they can't get the blueprints, but TriData had them. And so another thing that the good rabbi did, he had a consortium, a group that he worked with, and what they did was they refurbished commercial 767s and turned them into military refueling tankers and sold them to militaries around the world. Now, if you can look at what I just said about the good rabbi, you know that 9/11 could not have happened without him. After he they stopped looking for the $2.3 trillion after the Pentagon got hit. By the way, the Pentagon explosions took the Office of Naval Investigation out, which is where the investigation was going, and the Army auditors that were also working on it. And those offices were not next to each other, and they also were not in the path of any 757 because no 757 hit that building. So here you see that we have an investigation that was taken down, and then for Building 7, we had the investigation into Enron, Global Crossing, and WorldCom. Those were big, fraudulent, huge investigations, the evidence being held in the Building 7, and it was completely destroyed. Again, all that evidence was gone, so the guys that were in trouble for those fraudulent expeditions that they were involved in, they kind of got off a little bit lighter than they would have had they found all the evidence, I'm sure. Some of that evidence was also held in the North Tower. So you see, there were things that don't point to the Al-Qaeda benefiting from this, but it points to other people benefiting and other ways that this could have happened. Since I've gone into this research, I've seen that some pilots claim that the aircraft we saw go into the South Tower, that's, by the way, one of the most asked questions of me by airline pilots that contact me. Have I figured out how did they get that 767 to melt into that steel building like a hot knife through butter? And no, I have not figured out how they did that. I just know where the real airplanes were taken, and I cannot figure out if that was trick photography or exactly what that was. But we know, because we study crashes, that planes do not disappear into a building like that. They can't go that fast. They're aluminum. So anyway, that's kind of where I was with all of this. And I kept looking, and I had my protagonist look real good, too. And at the Pentagon, she says, well, how would it benefit any group of terrorists to destroy that evidence? And you can't get an answer for that. There is no answer for that. There's only one person or one group of people that actually benefited from 9/11. And there is a group of people that created something called the Project for the New American Century. And this is written, and you can find it on Wikipedia, and you can find all the people that signed it. they were saying that in order for these 7 wars that they wanted to have happen in the Middle East, and this is prior to 9/11, that the American people would need to rally, just like you did, Doug, and unfurl their flags and go to war. They needed a quote-unquote new Pearl Harbor, and that's exactly what 9/11 was. It was a complete orchestrated illusion, and a lot of us fell for it.
A very methodical
Forgive yourself for doing
illusion.
that.
Well, it's Joe and I were talking, and after when Joe and I worked together, Rebekah, I mean, we. Joe, perhaps my son being a lot younger than me, he was saying, look at all this conflicting information, and I just didn't want to hear it. I mean, I really did not want to hear it. I was not being intellectually honest with myself or anyone else. But it's still, Rebekah, it's just still, I'm looking at 9/11. I mean, you talk about the ultimate fraud, but I guess we're thinking, I'm thinking inside of a box, a predetermined box. We don't know. We do know that technology 40, 50 years in advance of what we know that we've got now. So, I mean, who knows? Anything is possible. And, of course, Building 7, that kerfluffle with BBC,
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this. And I didn't, and I'm not sure if I told you this, or I'm not sure if I even who I told about this, but and I don't know if this fits anywhere in your investigation. When and I happen to be talking with my wife about you coming on tonight, and she said, "Hey, remember on the morning of 9/11?" And I remember this extremely vividly. I was sitting at my desk, and my wife had come in our study, in my study in my home, and my wife came in, and she said, one of her friends, I won't give the name out, is across from the Cleveland Hopkins Airport, and there is a jet on the far end of the tarmac being swarmed by, and her friend, the caller, was watching this happen in real time. A SWAT team, or whatever you would want to call the response team, was surrounding this aircraft, passenger aircraft, on the far end of the Cleveland Hopkins Airport tarmac. Does that fit anywhere? I mean, or could that just be? I mean.
I do know about that, and actually, it was a Delta Flight 1989, and Delta Flight 1989 also left Boston for either Los Angeles or San Francisco, I believe. Very similar path in Flight 11. It left around close to 8:30, and what happened with that aircraft is it was a bomb threat. And there were several bomb threats. Actually, some of them were called into air traffic control towers and control centers that day, when most people don't have those phone numbers because they're not really public. So that tells you that somebody that had access to some phone numbers that you and I don't have were making these bomb threats to make it even more hectic and crazy. But Delta Flight 1989 did land at Cleveland with a bomb threat. And just so you know what happens when you have a phoned-in bomb threat, and you see these, remember a couple months back, maybe 2 or 3 months back now, my time's gone by pretty quickly here, that there was somebody tweeting tweets that were bomb threats. And we saw a lot of aircraft, and I believe some of them were down in Florida and in Texas. Like JetBlue, I think, was one of them. I can't remember all of them. Delta had a couple of them. And they tweeted out these bomb threats. And if you'll remember seeing this on TV or see video of this, that what happens when you come in with a bomb threat, and that day, now we've already had 2 planes go into buildings. So I know that some of the terminals and towers were also evacuated, which isn't usually common in a bomb threat. But commonly, in a bomb threat on an aircraft, you will land the airplane and you will park in what's called a remote parking space. And they're actually out there. I mean, you park in them. Over the years, I parked many, many times remotely for various reasons. And they will park you there, and they will do that for this reason. And remember in the Methodical Illusion in Orlando where there's that airplane that explodes?
Yes.
This is one of the reasons I put that in that book. If you are at the terminal and a bomb blows up, that fireball is going to go right up the jetway into the terminal. and also hit other aircraft as well. So there's all kinds of fueling trucks. The airplane's wings are full of fuel. So if you have an airplane that's parked at a gate, and you know how we park wingtip to wingtip at those jetways, so you'll see how tight they're parked in there, especially at the busier aircraft or airports, that if one airplane blows up at a jetway, you're going to have that fireball go up there. The plane's going to blow up, the terminal's going to catch on fire, and several aircraft will too. So they park the aircraft that might have a bomb on board remotely. So if it does and it blows up, that's what's going to happen, just that one plane, those passengers. Then when they bring a truck that has stairs to it attached to the front of, and it's like a stairwell. And you can see these at some airports as well. And when you land remotely for whatever reason, that's usually how they get you off, as opposed to jumping out the chute. And so if you can walk out, if there's a bomb threat, they usually do that. I suppose if there's a fire or smoke in the cabin, we'll blow the chutes and push you down the chute and tell you to run away from the airplane. But so you see what happens is they pull the stairs up, and now what you'll see, and I saw this a couple of months ago with these bomb threats, they have bomb-sniffing dogs check all your luggage, and they put you on a bus, and they'll take you into the terminal somewhere. Now, I think in Cleveland, that might have been where they took them to the NASA hangar or something, because they'd actually evacuated the terminal, perhaps. And the reason they evacuated the terminal is because we'd already had 2 airplanes or 3 airplanes at that time, actually 3, because something was supposed to have hit the Pentagon by then, actually go into a building. And so they didn't know if this was a bomb on board, and then maybe kamikaze pilots in there. They were going to go right in the terminal. So I know a couple of terminals and towers were evacuated, too, because we just didn't know what all was going to happen.
With that, very Rebekah, good. We are up against the top of the hour. We're going to take our break now. We are talking with Rebekah Roth. Her website, methodicalillusion.com, methodicalillusion.com. It's also the title of her book, and we have received correspondence from listeners via email and other means, Rebekah, that people have responded and commented on your book, and they really enjoyed it. I have not seen any negative or even questionable emails. People really... I
got to tell you, you know what, Rebekah, your book in Amazon, bestseller, number 1562 in books. You've got so many positive reviews. And folks, one of the things that one of the enemy or tactics of the enemy is to, when truth does come out, is to assail the book through negative reviews. And but I know our audience has come through and really, really giving you the 5-star rating on the book, which I got to tell you, it's a great read. Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and continue.
No, it's a fantastic read. Once again, Methodical Illusion. It's the name of the website and her book. Ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I want to thank each and every one of you for hanging with us, joining us tonight as we talk with our very special guest, Ms. Rebekah Roth, the author of Methodical Illusion. Folks, you got to get your hands on a copy of this book. It'll change the way that you look at 9/11. And I know that all of you out there, the majority of people listening to this, have problems with 9/11, but with the official narrative. But Rebekah Roth has the bona fides. She worked in the airline industry 30 years, nearly 30 years, as an international purser and flight attendant. She's done the research. She's done her homework. She knows the ins and outs of all of the things that are involved in airline travel. She knows what she's talking about. Visit her website, methodicalillusion.com, and also Facebook. And this is something, too, that Ms. Roth, that you mentioned. It's very interesting. And see, people think, well, wait a minute, we're talking about 9/11 here. That was, 14 years ago, over a decade, 14 years ago. Why are we talking about this again? Well, isn't it interesting? Germanwings Flight 9525 went down March 24th, 2015. And on your Facebook page, isn't it something that you found some information that's very consistent? Well, I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but it's interesting. You also found a big hint in the Daily Mail. Okay, we follow your Facebook postings because you've got some great information in there, and you're starting to connect the dots. And as we see things like Jade Helm coming into
into play here this summer, and other things that have gone on over the last couple of months. Things are starting to sound familiar, and it's very disconcerting. So I'm going to turn you loose and give you the floor, and just want to thank you so much again for being a beacon of truth in the muck and mire of this the fog of disinformation out there. So you just go ahead and take us where you want to take us.
Well, you're so welcome. Thanks for that great introduction, too. I do like connecting with people on Facebook, and if you go to the website, you can see a little follow me on Facebook button. That's the best way, because there's a lot of Rebekah Roth in the world, but there's the only one that wrote this book. So I also just kind of want to let you know this before we continue on, and I do want to talk about German Wings. I'm working on a sequel. And the sequel, I hope to have it out before the end of the summer. And it's amazing. And why am I doing a sequel on this is, remember that I gained this terabyte of Freedom of Information Act data. And lo and behold, I deconstructed that too. And I have found things in there that are just going to be absolutely mind-boggling. And so some people attacked me for not having references in my novel, but this one's going to have some pretty mind-blowing things in the appendix. And it's going to be screenshots and links to documents, so you can actually see that what this really is that I found in the Freedom of Information Act data. And let me just say this. When I say this thing was methodically planned out, it really was. And it was really methodically planned out, and not that day. It was planned out far in advance. And so without giving away what I am going to show you in the next book, let me just say it's going to make a lot of things happen in the world of truth. And so for people that are wanting hardback books, a lot of people ask me for hardback books, and I hope to have it on our new online store. There's a secure online store, so if you go to the website and you want an autographed book, I will have a hardback edition as well. And it's going to be the second edition where Doug Hagmann's got his endorsement in there and the new foreword from the United Pilot. And once that hardback comes out and everything's secure, and I've got a bunch of them that I can connect with and sign and send out to people, then I'll pull the softback temporarily and put it on as the second edition. It might take 3 days of being off, but you can get the Kindle or the hardback during that short period of time when I'm switching out the softback into the second edition. And it has been crazy. At one point, this book went to number 9 overall out of 8 million books on Amazon. And here I thought 20 people would read it. Number 9. And now it's available at all the bookstores. It's listed on Ingram. It's not on anybody's shelf except for a couple small bookstores that have actually contacted the publisher and ordered boxes. One's in Canada and one's somewhere else in the United States. But it's not at every Barnes & Noble. So you have to order it and prepay for it. It comes in 3 to 7 days. And at Barnes & Noble, I think we got up to number 12 overall, and you have to pre-order this book. So, and that's pretty amazing considering how many books both those places sell. And so a lot of people are waking up to this truth, and we're hungry for it. They were ready. And I think that, as I said at the beginning, and God's timing is always perfect. And I had so many people, I can't tell you, and this is from your audience, that contacted me afterwards and read the book and said, had I heard your interview or read this book even 6 months ago, I would never have believed it, but I'm ready. And I was ready, and now I know what's the truth. And I think this whole nation is so ready to wake up. And I think that we've seen Brian Williams, Bill O'Reilly, people that we trusted to tell us the news, being lying to us for decades. They were all lying to us on 9/11. I mean, they've busted Bill O'Reilly back to the 80s, and Brian Williams the same. I mean, he's actually been caught lying in delivering the news. And now the news is supposed to be real, the happening, what's going on. It's supposed to be the truth. And so when you find out that your news sources are actually caught lying to you, then you know that we're in a bad way here in this country. And I think that people want to wake up and unite in truth. And I think that's what we're seeing happening. I didn't know that God would use me. I'm pretty humbled by it, actually. but I didn't think in a million years that I went through this. I went through some crazy stuff in my career because we had a period of time before 9/11 where air rage was very popular, and we were treated pretty horribly, and there was really no support for us. After 9/11, that kind of all changed, but so did so many other things like the TSA fondling us and squeezing out our lotions and toothpaste and stuff every time we tried to go to work. So, there's been a lot of changes, and a lot of people are just telling me that, just like myself, you could not get me on an airplane now. Absolutely. If I can't drive there, I won't go there. And it's just amazing how many people are contacting me just, praying for my protection, and I really do appreciate that because, we all work on vibrations and frequencies, and one of the things that Jesus was trying to share with us was his joy and love. And the reason for that is they're really high frequencies. And those are the frequencies that can actually overcome fear and doubt. I always refer to those as lieutenant of the devil. And so when you have that deception that we have, and it's proven to us, we can see that the media, just like Max Hager says in the book, it's just one arm of the octopus. It's one tentacle of the octopus that controls everything in this country. The CIA runs every single network. And every single thing you see on that television, even the commercials, are brainwashing you. So people need to understand that and wake up to that, because the only way you can pull yourself, it's kind of like pulling yourself out of the matrix. But what happens with the 9/11 truth, and this is certainly what happened to me, and you see it happens to Vera, and you're going to see even more so in the sequel, that once the truth of 9/11 is open to you, the veil lifts, and you can then start to see things that are happening in front of your face, and you say, that's just like 9/11. That's just like the other false flags. And that brings me to what happened in Paris. And you'll see these things, and I'll just point out a couple things to you, just so you know. And I do want to talk about that Jade Helm thing as well, because I am watching all of it, because I watch everything that goes on, right?
Oh, I know.
Drone strike. Every time I look out the window, my husband's like, "Is there a drone coming?" We kind of laugh about it because, when I say that, one, I've had this death experience, this incredible experience myself with Jesus, and so I can't fear death, and because it's so much better place to go. And if they want to take me out, that'll only elevate everything I've discovered to better everyone share that, because that means it's a real threat to them if anything happens to me. So, but interesting thing. Yep. Charlie Hebdo in Paris, you'll remember. Now, there's some things that the media didn't really let us know, but actually those cartoonists, I guess we can call them, that's what they wanted to be known as. They were actually mostly all Jewish French, and they also were doing very pornographic, very repulsive artwork or cartoons using Muhammad and the Pope and various other religious leaders. It's very offensive to people. I mean, if you were Mormon and they did this to Joseph Smith, you'd be spun out. And if you're Catholic and they do it to the Pope, the same. It's very offensive, and it's in very poor taste. Sex with animals and just really nasty stuff. And so when we saw what happened on there, you remember that the media first said, oh, these guys, they're on video, because coincidentally they had a cameraman wearing a flak jacket, a bulletproof vest on the roof of the building right next door to where the shooters parked. How coincidence is that? He was actually wearing a flak jacket. I mean, he's all over YouTube. You can see this guy. And filming with his little camera. And then you heard the media people on CNN say, oh, well, they're professional. Look how they hold that weapon. And so they had all their weapons specialists and their, talking heads on there saying how these two guys, they were well-trained and professionals. Well, lo and behold, they steal 2 cars. And don't you know, they left their ID in the second car. Now, who wouldn't go do what they did and have a terrorist event like that without their identification? And why would you possibly I mean, how could you possibly be dumb enough? But again, it's just like those paper passports on 9/11. The only thing that survived in Shanksville, no luggage, no titanium engine parts, nothing, no bodies and nothing except one paper passport, not from a passenger, not from a crew member, but from one supposed terrorist who wasn't even on board the aircraft.
Hey,
same thing with... So you see, I like to say this now. When I chit chat with my husband, I kind of cut to the chase. Lucifer has no creativity. He will constantly do the same thing over and over again. If you read the Bible and history, you're going to see the same stuff is done over and over and over again. This ID thing, same kind of thing. And so we're seeing the same kind of thing with MH370. People always are asking me about what happened with MH370. That aircraft, 777, completely disappeared. It fell off radar. Well, when it falls off radar, don't you know that the flight termination system or some sort of autopilot override device, Boeing has their own version of the flight termination system now on their aircraft. So since about 2006 or 8, they've come out with a patent, and it's now been mandatory for all U.S. carriers to have some sort of remote control device. But if you listen to CNN, they are still arguing that. But that's actually on George W. Bush made it mandatory that every U.S. carrier has some sort of flight termination system device that can be taken over remotely. In the very near future, air traffic controllers will be able to remotely land any aircraft that they think is in trouble. They just don't have it all set up, and it's being set up through some satellite technology they haven't been trained in yet. So just keep that in mind when you go flying next time.
Well,
because this 9/11 thing can be done again.
I mean, if I was a pilot of a plane, I'd be a little bit concerned about that. In one way, maybe I'd feel okay, because if something happened to me or my co-pilot or both, we'd have a chance. But otherwise, no. I mean, how do pilots feel about that?
Well, I covered this quite a bit in the book, because Vera, being a flight attendant, and Jim Bowman, the other character, they dissect this whole thing with. And they talk about this, and this is true what happened to me. Well, in the early 90s, when they came out with the flight termination system, Boeing sold it to some commercial carriers in the United States, not all. The company that I work for did not buy them. However, a lot of them did. Like I said, American flight attendants have told me they called theirs the flight interruption system. But they were sold in the event that a hijacker got inside the cockpit and took control of the aircraft. We can land the airplanes remotely. I always asked, well, who's we? Who's we that's going to land that plane remotely? I think I know who they are now. But this came out, let's say in the early to mid-90s. It's just another precursor to every step every brick that was put in the wall, every step that was made toward this methodical illusion was planned out not just weeks or days or months, even years before 9/11 happened. And so we have the flight termination system taking over. And listen, and what I just said to you, in the event of a hijacking, and a hijacker took control of the cockpit, we had 4 aircraft that day that had flight termination systems on board that we land them remotely didn't happen. Well, where was the we then? Why weren't they remotely landed? Because they were already in use, and they can only be in use on that one frequency, and they were being landed. And there was no way the pilots could let anyone know. Not even the flight attendants in the back. Oh. And so that's what happened. And so that can happen again. And not only can that happen that it's taken over and landed, it can be taken over and crashed into a building. It can be taken over and landed anywhere else. Or in the case of MH370, what I did was I immediately looked at their fuel load. They were going to Beijing. And so you always have to have a little more fuel than your destination, depending upon where your alternate airport is. For instance, landing in Seattle, maybe you might have an alternate of Portland or Moses Lake or some nearby airport, and it kind of all depends on what airline you're with and what kind of aircraft you have, how long a runway you need, that sort of thing, and maybe even projected weather. But they give you enough fuel to get there and to circle for a time or two. So I realized that they had enough fuel to get to Beijing. And then I turned around and looked on the map, and lo and behold, if you turn around to the left, just like they told us that plane did, and keep on going instead of cutting off the map like CNN did, you see Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is a drone base that's run by the United States and Great Britain. And they have super long runways and very big hangars. And so then I immediately started to look at who was on board, and that's the stuff I was listening for. And they have, lo and behold, just like on 9/11, there were five, I believe, at least five electronic warfare scientists that had created some new electronic warfare, just like the Raytheon guys on 9/11. There were five Raytheon guys that were electronic warfare specialists. They actually could have been on the plane having the connection between the flight termination system and the ground. The Raytheon guys. I don't know.
Wow.
I haven't followed up on all of them, but that's what they were doing. The electronic warfare is that kind of stuff. And then we had Brian Sweeney, who was a radar specialist as well. So one of the things I did after the book came out is I started looking to see who all the potential handlers were. And it's amazing how you have these people like Todd Beamer, Let's Roll, and all of those guys they built out to heroes for the Hollywood movie. On that particular flight, they were almost all communication people. They were either involved with Booz Allen Hamilton, the MITRE company, or some other company that was involved with communications. Now, keeping that in mind, remember that these aircraft were very light loads that day. Had they all been full, we would have had over 800 passengers to take care of. But since these people were all involved with communications, they could easily have taken United and American's reservations computers and shown those flights as full. And so it was very easy. Who was involved with this could very easily have made it so, hey, it's a lot easier to take care of 250 people than 800 plus. 800 plus, that's two 747s full of people. If you've ever been on a 747 full, that's a lot of people.
Wow.
And that's what they would have had on the ground. So people always ask me, all the flights didn't operate because they weren't on BTS. BTS is the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. And just so if any of your listeners are curious about that, thinking the flights might not have operated at all, they were daily flights, and they did operate. And the BTS, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, was a voluntary program, and also the statistics were kept track of, the flights were kept track of by their flight number. And so after an incident, a crash like this, I know you would never want to get on American Airlines Flight 11, especially on September 11th, 2015. You would look at that ticket and go, and all that stuff would replay in your mind, just like it does if you look at a photograph of the hole in the tower or, one of those things that we saw that day, because it's actually, it traumatized us all. So first off, we need to all forgive ourselves for being hoodwinked, and that's one of the things Max Hager says is when he shares the James Corbett from the Corbett reports of 9/11 in a nutshell, that cute little recitation he does. He says, when people hear that, they realize they've been hoodwinked, and we have been, and it's okay that you were, because I was. I mean, everyone, if you're normal, you were. You'd have to be a real questioning person to look at what we saw on TV and go, that does not happen. Later on, people started to see that, they started to find nanothermite in the dust and things that were pointing to explosions that actually took place. So
right.
Let me just chat for just a little bit, if we have time, about the German wings incident, because, anytime something happens with airplanes, I'm on it, because this is what I studied for so many years and such a part of my life. The German wings was an Airbus. And let me tell you what happened here in the United States when the Airbus first rolled out. Now, Airbus is a European consortium company, and they compete with Boeing. And the Airbus, interesting, it's what they call fly-by-wire. It's a computerized aircraft, and it does not have a lot of redundant systems. Like the Boeing system, it's pretty redundant. If something doesn't work, there's one or two other systems that can take over the aircraft and fly it. It's very redundant. And so those are really safety nets for us. But the Airbus, being a super sensitive aircraft, being this fly-by-wire, when we first started flying them here in the United States, our company had at least two, maybe three incidences that I remember hearing about were on landing just before the aircraft touched down on the runway. The aircraft itself decided, much like HAL on 2001 Space Odyssey, it was going to take off. And that's not always a good thing because you don't you don't always have a lot of runway in front of you if your airplane just decides on a spur that it's going to do what it wants to do. And when the FAA investigated these incidences, now you'll remember there was an Airbus crash at a Paris air show, and this was around that same time we started taking delivery of these aircraft. And that crash had happened, and that was this very similar type of thing. It didn't follow the pilot's command, and so it crashed. What the FAA investigated and later claimed what caused that Airbus that we had to take off on landing was a disc man being played by a gentleman in the front row of first class. And now a Discman, you remember how those went? We went from Walkman and the little cassettes to the Discman where you put your CD in there. And yep. Those are actually played by using a CD is read by using a laser. And that's how sensitive this airplane is. So let's just go to the Alps for a second in our minds. And I know that those stones that those mountains are, because they're really sharp, there's a lot of granite and crystal in there. And 125 miles away, we have the CERN Super Collider. And at that time, it was cranked up to, I think, around 6. And they were bragging that day that they were going to be at full 13 televolts by the end of the month. And 5 hours after that plane crashed, interesting things about the crash site as well, but 5 hours later, CERN then started backdating to the 21st that they had some metal or something, some kind of garbage get in their track, and they had to start backing off and slowly unwinding the collider. And then they backed it up again and started it up around Easter again. So here is what I thought when I first saw this. Now I remember how sensitive these were because a Discman doesn't put out much. And that's what the FAA here in the United States claimed was the cause. And that's when we all could no longer use our electronic devices below 10,000 feet. You remember when that law came in? That was the Airbus that did that.
Wow. I do remember that. Okay, so that puts things in context and perspective. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and so on the German wings, Airbus, you have the captain going out to go tinkle. And then since 9/11, you need to understand that immediately after 9/11, they started showing up with our doors started being replaced. The cockpit doors were replaced with, check this out, grenade-proof doors. And I mean, not just bulletproof, grenade-proof. If you put a grenade in the inside an aircraft, there wouldn't be a door or a cockpit to worry about. The whole fuselage, the whole thing would blow apart, just like when we saw MH17 be hit by some sort of ordnance from another plane. Once you sever the skin of the aircraft fuselage, there's nothing. You're going to blow up like a balloon popping. So, but yeah, they made them grenade-proof. But on the outside in the cabin, there is here's your keyword, electronic keypad. And the captain would have fingered in the electronic code, and every airline puts their own thing in there. And then the door, what happens to the door? It doesn't just open. It unlocks, and then you have to turn the door handle. I know this because it was a pain to have my hands full of drinks or dinners and have to turn the doorknob, too, and I couldn't just push it in. So you have to turn the doorknob and then push the door in, and then it's unlocked, and it's all this little thing. But the electronic keypad didn't work. And that told me that probably nothing on the airplane was working. And then when they said this, that you could hear the co-pilot breathing, the flight data or the cockpit voice recorder is good, but it's not that good. If you could hear the guy breathing, then there were no jets on. There was nothing on.
So it was a big glider.
So I'm not. Yeah, and eventually they even said coincidentally the co-pilot was a glider pilot. I couldn't believe this, but yes. And so what I think happened is that something hit that airplane, whether it came from CERN and may have been an accident. I also found out that on my Facebook page today, I put this really interesting thing about this laser weapon that's ground-based. They're also based in airplanes in NATO and the United States military in the southern part of Germany, there's a base with these laser-equipped aircraft. Now, another interesting thing that I heard was the original eyewitnesses of the German wings crash said that, well, these fighter jets fly there all the time. They're used to hearing that, but this one sounded different. So that told me these fighter jets are always there. It's some sort of corridor for them to test in. And then they said as soon as they heard this long 8-second boom, which is kind of a long time for an explosion. 8 seconds is a long time. We're talking like earthquake stuff, right? For an explosion to last 8 seconds, that's a long explosion for an aircraft. But something caused it to make this loud 8-second boom, and then they said right after that, these fighter jets flew by. And so that told me there was some, obviously, fighter jet activity right there because they weren't scrambled for these people. And then here's another interesting thing. I said if they ever find the flight data recorder, they're going to find out nothing on that airplane was working for some reason. Something happened to their electronics, and the captain couldn't even get in with the keypad. And then CNN tells us the captain, they could hear him outside with an axe in the cabin. There is no axe in the cabin. But I will tell you this, there is an axe on board. It's inside the cockpit. So CNN for 3 days told us that the captain, they could hear him on the voice recorder, that he was out there crashing with an axe in the cabin. If we had an axe in the cabin, what would prevent a hijacker or a crazy lunatic or someone just claustrophobia grabbing that axe and doing exactly what we are supposed to believe the captain did? So somebody is feeding the media some real nonsense because there is no crash axe in the cabin, and yet you'll all recall that CNN was reporting this. And so when I thought, well, we're going to find out, but then I said to my husband, I'll bet you dinner for two at the most expensive place we can find that they never find the flight data recorder. And guess what? About 5 days later, they found it blackened, and it's burnt beyond repair. Well, let me tell you something. There are high-definition pictures that I have gathered off from online, and you can see people's clothing from their luggage. No burning, nothing burnt. And the flight data recorder is not 10 feet away from the voice recorder in that tail section of that aircraft. There was no fire there. There was nothing to burn. And so what they're showing us is the flight data recorder is bogus, totally. There was no fire there. And you can go look online. You can just Google image the pictures and see. I'd like to know what a coroner is seeing. I know I heard they had 600 body parts. That's not unusual in a crash to find body parts, that bodies don't stay connected. It's not unusual at all. 600 pieces, that's quite a lot, but I'm kind of curious what condition they were in. But I saw lots of clothing and airplane parts along the mountains. And nothing was charred except the flight data recorder.
All right. Well, that certainly raises a lot. I mean, obviously the inconsistencies raises a lot of questions and certainly punches big holes in the official accounting of that particular crash. I mean, okay. Yeah, I mean, from start to finish, this, but the real overriding or pressing factor in my mind is the template. It almost seems like they're using the same playbook over and over and over again. And
that's Lucifer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's nothing new under the sun, But it seems like they're refining things as we, from 9/11 to today, and that's kind of the way we titled the episode. Methodical Illusion from 9/11 to the present. We're seeing things play out, and I think it almost seems like they're refining techniques and trying new things and using. I mean, I'll just leave it at that because, but to what end? I mean, where are we going with all of this? For the missing aircraft, the MH-70. What are the plans there? I mean, what's, where are we headed with all this?
I just, when I started to look at that and I figured that it was brought to Diego Garcia via remote control the same way. And by the way, when they're talking about these remote control systems, you can Google search this too. Boeing was sued by Lufthansa, by the German government, who owns Lufthansa. They also own German Wings. It's their kind of their budget. But Lufthansa is government-owned airlines. The German government and the Chinese government found flight termination systems on some of their Boeing deliveries, and they sued Boeing Aircraft Corporation. They didn't want that remote control thing in there, and that was several years back, after 9/11, but it was several years ago. So now I don't know. I find that interesting that then this German wings thing took place, and you've got all the politics going on within the Ukraine and the government that we really installed over there in the Ukraine and their associations with, everyone, and the demonization of Putin. And you've got a lot of people that are trying real hard to make a lot of people think that this is the end times in Revelation. And even though it may look like that and feel like that, keep in mind that we're being manipulated and we're being played just like we were for 9/11. So sometimes who they would like to point out as the boogeyman is just a fall guy. Just like I think looking back at John F. Kennedy now, I think most people understand that Lee Harvey Oswald was just a patsy. And
right.
Jack Ruby, shot him just so that we couldn't ever get to the truth. And sometimes you'll see that happening over and over again where the Charlie Hebdo guys, they were orphans, they had no family, and unfortunately they were killed, so we don't know what was going on really. But someone did uncover that one of those guys actually had done some sort of anti-terrorism video for the French government. So they weren't strangers to the French government. So more than likely they were agents, and they probably are somewhere now on the beach. Nobody saw them dead, and they never mentioned their funeral. They were orphans. How convenient is that? And the fact that they leave their ID, and you start to see these things over and over again. And unfortunately for the powers that be, the manipulators, there are a whole lot more people awake. And I know this from your audience, the people that have contacted me via Facebook, email, and just said, I always knew there was something wrong with 9/11. I never saw a plane crash at Shanksville or at the Pentagon. And there were people just like me that were watching it on TV that didn't see a plane crash. And maybe some of them have just set it aside, and a lot of people it was always nagging to them, what happened, what really happened. And now I think they know, and I think I know. So, and now I'm actually having lots more proof of what I discovered, and that's not making some people happy. And unfortunately, those people are part of the truth movement. I've actually had people try to find me, get into my personal stuff and try to find me, and they're actually quote unquote truthers. But people that are the good people that aren't trying to shoot the messenger, so to speak, they're very supportive, and they're starting to look now with their eyes wide open, and that's that veil of truth that lifts open. And in the Bible, I should have this phrase down, but I remember saying, eyes to see and ears to hear. And I think that's what happens when you start waking up to the truth about 9/11. One, you have to forgive yourself for being hoodwinked, and everyone was, so it's easy to do that one. And then when you step out in truth, let me tell you this, because I took that step, and it's scary. It's very, very frightening, and it's disheartening. And you start to think of all the friends. I lost lots of friends in Vietnam. I lost an uncle in World War II. You start to think of all of these people that have lost arms and legs and limbs and are coming back post-traumatic stress. And what did they fight for? This illusion. And you lose something that's so much in the heart and soul of your center of your being that it's very hard to do. And that's one thing that I like to help people try to get through, and why I wrote the book the way I did, was to walk people through and help people come out of cognitive dissonance and meet that truth head on, and understand that you're going to feel like someone kicked you right in the gut when you wake up to this, because I did. And I think everyone does. I've had a lot of people tell me they cried 3 times in the book, and that when Vera spoke to the White House and to the politicians, that she spoke for them, and they felt like that was for their own words. It's very interesting, the people that sent. And one person just sent me an email that said, I am now awake, totally. I just read your book. And boy, and that makes all of it so worthwhile. Because once you wake up to this,
I love your book because, you know, the way it's written, you can give it to your neighbor who's not awake or somewhat skeptical, or a family member, and it's not offensive the way it's written. It draws you in, and it kind of just the way you had developed the characters and the plot. It really, I mean, it's really, to me, it's a tool, and your book, that is, it's a tool that really helps me help others to see what's really going on. And people say, aha, okay. And some people say, oh, well, you know. But most, I think, let's see, two people I've given the book to, and they've said, wow, you know, there's, and like you said, I've always known there was something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And at least it gets them thinking. It gets them out of that box that they were thinking. Rebekah, if I can go back to one thing, I found this amazing, and I don't know how much research that you put into this with respect to the German wings, Lufthansa. One thing that really kind of struck me, and I'm not sure if you how much research you've done on this, but the day of that Airbus A320, the 144 people killed. The day that happened, the airline changed their logo. Did you happen to see that? They changed their logo from it was a diving dove, and it was a color. It was red, yellow, and blue, I believe, and they changed it to black and gray, and they changed the both the color and also the design of the logo. And I thought, all the days to do this, it just didn't sit right with me. And they said, well, you know, we changed the colors to black and gray out of mourning. It seemed like the smoke hadn't even cleared from the crash. And are you saying that they announced they were going to change their logo after the crash? Well, actually, it was almost contemporaneous with the crash. The logo was normally maroon, yellow, or red, yellow, and all of a sudden, I mean, almost like this, at the very moment of the crash, it went to a different style logo, and it went to all black and gray for their aircraft. I'm thinking, you know, this isn't right. I mean, it was almost as if, because, you know, a corporation, they don't change their logos. It takes more than an hour and a half to do that, and thought and all of this. And all of a sudden, bang, you know, the logo's changed.
It's a huge process, actually. It's a very lengthy process. It takes a long, long time to change this. I know the plane was yellow and red because I remember seeing the parts that I saw, kind of a bright magenta, reddish, pinkish yellow, and that's it on that airplane that crashed. But yeah, changing a logo, sometimes they work on that for a year or more.
Exactly.
It's a very lengthy thing.
Yeah, and they made it sound as if, well, you know, it was just in honor or in mourning of the victims. But the way this was done, it never set right with me. And you can find it if you do a search, folks, on the internet. You can find the changes made, the images. But I just thought, man, you know, of all the times, of all the days to roll this change out, it was almost as if this was planned from the beginning. And the logo itself has got some illuministic undertones to it as well, or occultish undertones. But I won't get into that. But I just thought I'd mention that because
well, that kind of does segue right into CERN. We were talking about what was going on at CERN, and this should be a concern for everyone that's paying attention to what's going on. This super collider, they're trying to open portals to other dimensions. If most Christians can hear this word, demons, and it's very, very I guess I'm going to say just dark and very much satanic. What they're doing, it's not just a science experiment. Even Stephen Hawking said that, I mean, they could open a black hole and completely destroy us. And there are people that believe that when Atlantis was here on the planet, that this is the same type of stuff that they did. If you create a black hole, it's going to suck everything into it. And so, but I think that the demonic thing that they are planning, and if you don't know about CERN, get on YouTube and watch some things about CERN. They did something when they first started this collider starting back up again just a few days before the crash, and it was a dance, and it was Shiva, the Indian god of destruction, and I think it's the god of destruction is Shiva, is their symbol, one of their symbols. Their other logo is a 666. Yeah. And they did a dance, and a bunch of the scientists, I guess we'll call them, were the dancers, and they did a dance, and it was called the Dance of Destruction as the thing was starting up. There's a lot of evil around this, and so when you sit down to pray, it's very important that we pray, because we're in a spiritual battle right now, and the dark forces seem to be doing some crazy things, and I believe that CERN is a big part of that. And if they bring in, well, let's just say they open a portal and bring in all of the fallen angels that left with Lucifer, maybe they've been in the abyss, and that's what a lot of people are thinking is quite possibly going to happen. And this thing is going to take off and be at its maximum in coinciding with the Shemitah in September. And so that brings us into the Jade Helm, this Jade Helm military drill, and where they're drilling. I don't know so much about rounding people up or taking guns, because I've tried to find official, like city councils talking about their discussion with the military and why they were chosen to use this particular area. I know that in Utah, in Salt Lake County in Utah, they said they were using them because they had a really good bomb disposal and bomb squad kind of people in case something went wrong. Right. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. In case something went wrong, you're drilling, and I mean, I just hear things now. I'm being kind of blessed with some super discernment, but I don't really know what to make of it. I know there's a lot of fear being pushed online, but again, I just tell people, listen, if you can afford to be ready to not have to leave your house. And remember in the book how the tape recording caught the planner of 9/11 and what they had planned for America?
Yeah, I do.
Remember the 5 or 6 city attack? I actually made a YouTube about that because I had so many people asking me about that. And, of course, the cities were not mentioned. I had to just create it for the novel. But it did say 5 or 6 major cities would be attacked using biological, chemical, and nuclear warheads. Well, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I came home from Costco, and I'm in my kitchen unloading all the stuff. And I turn on Fox News, and I hear a politician, and guess what he's saying? He's preparing the people in his state for a biological, chemical, and or nuclear attack. And I'm like, wow, did he just read the Methodical Illusion or what? Now, that's the article I read off Ynet Daily, I believe it was. It was an Israeli newspaper claiming that the Israeli intelligence had intercepted al-Qaeda's plan, and that this 5 or 6 city attack would coincide with Osama bin Laden's Navy SEAL team death May 2nd for 9 days until May 11th. And I keep giving voice to that because that's right around the corner. And I talk to a lot of people that say, I can't afford to get ready. Well, let me tell you this. You can go to a Winco, a grocery store, or co-op, and you can buy 250 servings of oatmeal for about $15. And if that's all you can afford, go get it. And fill up some water jugs and get yourself ready. You don't have to be rich to be able to have food to stay in your house. Now, if there's a biological or chemical attack, you want to make sure that you have a room that you can seal up. So make sure you get some shower curtain liners and some good strapping, some kind of shipping tape or some duct tape or something. And, just start thinking clearly, because you need to be on your feet. We need more people on their feet than off their feet. So be aware. This could happen, and this could all be coinciding with something that either happens in May or again in September. And don't forget, they have the September 11th anniversary. They can blame this all on a new boogeyman. I'm assuming they'll blame this on Assad, Syria, and Iran, because that's where they want to go to the next wars.
I agree with that.
Anything could happen, and they're going to have these troops out. Now, when I first read about Jade Helm, there were only 1,200 troops involved. Well, I thought, well, if you spread out 1,200 guys in 10 states, then you're going to go have about half a dozen guys sitting in a tavern. Of course, we're not going to notice. But one of the things they said was, and again, it's conflicting information, and this is what I saw with 9/11 and how I dissected that, is they said that the people, the general public, won't even notice us. They won't even know we're around. We're going to be drilling right there in their neighborhood, but they won't even know we're there. And then the next sentence they said, we'll be repelling from helicopters and drilling between midnight or 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. Well, let me tell you something. If a Chinook helicopter or 3 come over your neighborhood at midnight or 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, you're going to know they're there. So those are very conflicting statements. You can feel them. You're right. Your whole body will shudder. So what is it? Is it we're not going to notice, or are we going to be scared out of our skin? Because if, Chinook or Hueys come over, they're very loud, and it's very scary. Yeah, especially if they're coming low enough that they can repel out of them. So, and what about these people that aren't on the Internet, grandma and grandpa that are great-grandma and great-grandpa that are in their 80s watching TV? They don't know what's going to happen. I mean, and, you think about those people or people in a retirement center, they're not watching YouTube. A lot of people are not involved with the stuff that a lot of us are. So it could be very frightening for a lot of people. But they will be in position. If something happens in May, they're all going to, or September, then the whole thing is going on till September 15th.
The timing is troubling. Everything is troubling, and I thank you so much, because the template that in the alternative media, we obviously talk about the template for 9/11 and how it's being reused, and you talk about this, and you really have this down very well. And we've been following you, like I said, on Facebook and your work. And I can see the way you're developing the information. And folks, listeners, please grab a copy of her book if you can, and follow her on Facebook, Rebekah Roth on Facebook, because talk about a great. You've got some good intuitive instincts, investigative abilities, and I really appreciate that. Let me ask you, the reports of Walmarts being closed, especially in the same geographical area of Jade Helm, have you heard about that, supposedly attributed to plumbing problems?
Yes, I have. I'm following. Nothing gets past me now. I mean, I pay attention to every little thing that's out there. Yes, I have been following that, and at first I started digging into that. I could only find one Walmart, a super Walmart, and now I'm seeing documents from the government that these super Walmarts are actually, they kind of play a dual role, and they will actually be like maybe something that we would know as like a FEMA camp or a holding tank or someplace where people could be brought to. And that, of course, now they have some time. They just closed them just a couple of days ago to get that stuff out of there. Because think about how much merchandise is in a super Walmart. And if they're having a plumbing problem, it's going to take them, I'm going to guess, 30 days to really get everything out of there. And if they're going to use that to put some of this into or, pretend or drill to round us up, they're going to have to empty those stores completely, and they're very, very big stores. So I'm thinking there's a lot of merchandise in there. I would think it's going to take 30 days, wouldn't you, to really clean them out, those stores?
Well, yeah, I would think so. But I mean, the whole narrative behind the closings, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, and in fact, it was on the local news in Florida. Although this is not where Jade Helm is going to be, I was talking with Ted Brewer this morning, and he said on the local news in Orlando, it was on the Orlando station, the Walmart they're closing there for ostensibly for plumbing problems or whatever. the news went into the county courthouse, and then they, or wherever the documents would be for the permits and for the, all of the things that would relate to renovation and all that. Nothing at all was on file or has been filed. So that's just a ruse, obviously. So there's something that's not right with this.
Well, that's possible. Here's another possibility. I'm going to just step into the corporate world for a second here. Walmart's a huge company, and there's something like 4,200 stores or more. I can't remember the number I saw, but it's a lot. And they more than likely, when they do construct a super Walmart, remember, these are the ones that are like to have the big grocery stores, so they've got the coolers, the freezers, the meat market. There's water everywhere in those. There's plumbing everywhere in a super Walmart because they've got the, fish tank area and they've got the gardening area. So there is a lot of plumbing. And I'm thinking that corporately they probably hired one huge plumbing company, like how we've got all these giant corporations now, like Halliburton, and, not that they're the plumber, but just some huge plumbing company, and that does all of their super Walmarts or maybe all their Walmart stores, and that maybe that plumber used something that was faulty. Maybe they got some product that had, flaws in it, and they started coming apart. And in that case, they'd be covered not so much by a building permit. We would not know that, but there'd be a lawsuit, perhaps, and they would have to come back for the Walmart Corporation and do this. Now, why they would close 5 or 6 stores at once, unless they're leaking water, I don't know. We have to find someone, and I bet your audience knows these Walmart stores, one of them at least, that can report back to us that there's water leaking inside, because if you've got all that merchandise, whether it's, freezers or meat markets or clothing, if there's water leaking in there, they got to get rid of all that stuff. But how coincidental is it that 5 or 6 giant stores would leak all at once? Maybe it's possible, but they may be involved in a lawsuit, a construction lawsuit. So they may also be doing, let's say, the California store and then a Texas store and working their way onto the Oklahoma store. And they may have that mapped out that we just aren't privy to that information. So that's a possibility, but it is very concerning to me. Because there's something not right.
No, that spans over multiple states, and it is very suspicious. And there are some new reports out today, but it seems more like making excuses than actually explaining what's going on.
Yeah. Rebekah, we
certainly. Oh, sorry. Are we ready for another break?
Well, yeah. Can you hang with us for a little while, or do you have time?
Yeah, I sure can. I can. Yeah.
Oh,
and, do you want to have? I don't know. Do you do callers, or I don't know if anybody has any questions, or?
Well, we've got a whole ton of questions through our contact us page on our website. So buckle up and make sure, folks, your seat backs and tray tables are in their full upright lock position, because we will be in the ground shortly. You're listening to Rebekah Roth, author of Methodical Illusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday, April 17th, 2015 edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Our guest tonight is Rebekah Roth. Her website is methodicalillusion.com. It's also the name of her book, Methodical Illusion. If we're going to be taking calls this hour, and I would urge folks to visit her website. If you've read her book, if you like what you hear on the show, let her know. Go to her website and get her email and let her know.
Absolutely.
Because I know we've got our fair share of compliments for her, but you can just circumvent that whole process by sending them directly to her.
Yeah, and this also, too, folks, we've got such a great network of listeners and a cut above, let me tell you, a cut above anyone else, any other audience. And if you've got information for her that you think that she needs to have, certainly contribute the information to her. Let her decide, if it's useful or if it's something she's, because Ms. Roth is like a pit bull in terms of investigating things. A nice, a pit bull for our side, thankfully. So, anyway, Rebekah, I got a couple of, more than a couple, a ton of questions here through the interface on the Contact Us page on our website. If I can just toss a couple of pretty basic questions to you here, and they're all over the map in terms of content. So, and then we can hit the phones. This from Christine writes. Let me see here. Okay, here we go. Christine, I'm not sure which part of the country you're from, but I'll ask this. She writes, that famously played video clip of President Bush while speaking with the young children at a school, then being briefed by one of his security people about the attack on the World Trade Center. Is that fake too? Did he know in advance what was being orchestrated, and did he merely play his role for the video?
Well, I have a great answer for that, and this
Okay.
is how I dissected that. And I watched that video over and over, and I think most of us know of or know what the Secret Service is hired to do. They are hired to keep the President of the United States safe at all times. And when Andrew Card actually whispered in George Bush's ear at the school with the children reading the Pet Goat book, that's after the second plane hit, because no one knew what hit the first tower. So after the second plane hit at 9:03, I know what I thought, and I bet you all remember what you thought. We're at war with somebody.
Right.
We are under attack. And you'll remember that right at that time, and you can go back online and see these videos, CNN has their banner, America under attack. Terrorists have struck. And they did that right away. Before we even had any idea what happened, they were telling us terrorists had hit. And so if the Secret Service, well, if we all knew at 9:05, the Secret Service let George Bush sit there until almost 9:30, maybe 9:35 even, before they got him out. Now, in a normal circumstance, if we were under a terrorist attack in real life, they would have one on one elbow and one on the other, picked him up and said under no uncertain terms, Mr. President, we are leaving. And they would have taken him out of there, because don't forget, their job is to keep the President of the United States safe. And so
Exactly.
You have to ask yourself, why didn't the Secret Service do that? And it's just simply looking at the reality and what you saw. So do we want to know, I think he knew this was coming, and so did the Secret Service, or for some reason they chose not to keep the president safe that day. But maybe, just maybe, they knew he wasn't in any danger, because they knew exactly what was going to fall down that day.
Interesting.
Very well said.
And Rebecca, it's rather interesting. My studio emails just blipped out. So while I'm refreshing that, if you don't mind, let's take some calls from listeners with your questions. Okay. Joe,
and folks, if you want to call in, 661-244-9839. 661-244-9839, and press 1 once you're on hold to get into the queue. We're going to go to area code 805. 805. You're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Rebekah Roth.
Hello. This is great. First of all, didn't George Bush said that he saw the first plane hit the tower, and that was impossible?
From
That's
the
correct.
TV, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that film was from the Naudet brothers, and I believe it wasn't released for maybe even 3 days that we saw something hit in our tower. But yes, you're right. George Bush did say he saw it, and the guy was a bad pilot. He didn't see it. It's impossible. Mm-hmm.
And second is, they arrested 5 Israelis that were filming the towers being brought down from New Jersey. And also, did they catch a van on the George Washington Bridge with explosives with Israelis?
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, they rounded up about 250 quote-unquote Mossad agents / spies, and they were all put on an El Al aircraft and flown back to Israel shortly thereafter. That's correct.
Exactly. Excuse me. And just one more thought is, do you have any opinion on Sandy Hook and Boston bombing? Were they drills?
From all indications, they were. I haven't really gotten in depth into studying them, only because I'm kind of sticking to the airplane stuff because it seems to be my expertise. But it does appear that there were drills going on for both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your great research, and I will get off the line so somebody else can get on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Interesting.
Yeah, one of the common threads here, and we saw it with the the Paris train bombings.
There's drills all the time, right?
Right. They run these live drills, and sometimes these drills go hot, as they say, which is another reason why the Jade Helm is in the public's eye so much, is because these drills have a tendency to come to fruition. So it's concerning to us when we see these, especially even more massive, large-scale drills taking place.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's take another call here. We're going to go to area code 304. 304, you're up next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Rebekah Roth.
304.
Hi, Joe and Rebekah. Question. When are they going to stop doing this stuff? Because people are wising up, and the Jade Helm and everything. It really, most people aren't awake and they don't see what could happen. And I know there are a lot of people that are very upset right now. And I don't know how far or how deep this all goes, but I believe it all goes back to the fallen angels, and if they open up CERN and if they want to bring angels through, that's exactly what's going to happen, because God is bringing all of his enemies together in one place at one time for one reason. I don't know if you can say any more to that, but thank you for your time.
I just will add one comment. I think that statement you just made is right on, and it is very concerning, and I cannot tell people enough. And a lot of people ask me, I've actually been, I've taught preparedness. So people ask me, what are you preparing for? And I tell people, just go online and prepare yourself for an EMP attack. And if you're prepared for an EMP attack where you have no electricity, maybe no running water, and you can prepare yourself that way as best you can. You don't have to spend a lot of money. If you have some money, spend it. But if you don't, just get your basic camping gear and get yourself ready. If you don't know how to prepare for that, unplug your house from the electricity. Just hit your circuits and turn everything off for the weekend. And see what it's like, because that's what it's going to be like to not have electricity. If you don't have already books set aside in your emergency storage, you want to make sure you have some Bibles and some good reading material. Put a copy of the Methodical Illusion in there. But no, just get some good books and make sure you have candles, and don't throw all your glass bottles out in your jars that your peaches come in and stuff, because you can put tea lights in there and make a real safe candle and light up your room. Just start looking at that kind of stuff. If you're prepared for that, you can handle anything. And you need to prepare on a spiritual level as well, especially. And I mean, it just seems like we're living in a crazy world, and we are. We have a group of scientists, and it's a big group of scientists, and it's billions of dollars, and this has been going on for a very long time, that actually want to open a portal up to other dimensions. And if they bring any more demons in here that feels like we already are fighting, then we need to understand the power of prayer. And it's extremely important that you do get yourself square with God, and that you understand that prayer is a very, very powerful thing. This is a spiritual battle, and every time that you pray, and to pray with friends and family in your church, it lights up a light in that corner of darkness that this world really does feel like. It feels like we've sunk in to such darkness and abyss. You have to understand that the evil person, the evil entity that Satan is, wants you in the fear and hate and anger and all of those things. Those are low vibrations. You need to rise above it. That's one reason why it's really important to really understand and get your relationship squared away with Jesus. I just can't tell you that enough, because then you won't have that fear. And once you don't have that fear, you have such an incredible amount of strength. And we're going to need people that have that strength to help those people that are still in denial to this day. Something happens in September, try to be as ready as possible. I don't know that we have until September. September could just be the final phase. I think things could start happening, as I read, starting May 2nd. But since, and this is my logic speaking, since they want to blame Assad and Iran on this attack, that's what the powers that be, want to blame, because that's where they want to go next. Iran is Shiite Muslim, and so is Assad. They're very friendly, and they are the Muslims that are in Syria are the Shiite. The ISIS people are Wahhabi and Sunni, and they hate each other. And so you're going to see there's a conflict there. So it's going to be really hard for them to tell us ISIS is doing this, even though they're claiming that ISIS is 8 miles off the Texas border. Our border is wide open to this day, and so they want to be able to blame that boogeyman that's just over the border in Texas. They're setting it all up so that it can happen. But it's going to be interesting to see how they can twist this around to be ISIS on the other side of the border at Texas, pulling off all of this stuff, and then blame 2 Shiite Muslim countries that don't have any history of attacking anyone. So, learn what's going on, open your eyes, get yourself square with Jesus so that you can be a powerful pillar of strength for others, because you're going to need to bring others into this as well. They're going to be freaked out and paranoid and screaming and unprepared. So you will be standing as a pillar of strength. And if you are prepared emotionally, just be ready. And physically with your food, even if it's just oatmeal, if you just buy $30 worth of oatmeal, it's 500 servings. You can live on that. But don't be without, right, because those will be the people that get rounded up, and we're going to give you a free ham sandwich. If you just get on this bus. And don't be hungry. Be aware. And it doesn't take a lot of money. Do without something that, save that $14, $15 and get yourself something to eat. And it doesn't have to have a long shelf life. We might have this happen next month. So if you can get it all this weekend, get as much stuff as you can, you will feel better. And the more you get, the better you feel, because you start. You're not working out of fear. You're working out of preparedness, and that is accepting the fact that this, in fact, could happen to us. And that's a hard thing to accept as Americans. But I think our party's over. Very sound advice.
Yeah. It should be common sense. It used to be common sense, at least in my grandparents' generation. They had tons of cans of food all in the basement, both my grandparents from either side, and it was a regular
that's right,
practice. But today you see people are marginalized, and they call people who are preppers or prepare conspiracy theorists, and I think that deters people who do care about what the world perceives them as. And it's silly to be.
I mean, it seems like
due to name calling.
Well, they talk out both sides of their mouth. They say, well, you should be prepared to have 3 days of food, but then they turn around and vilify the people who do prepare. Rebekah, let me ask you this. I just pulled down my notes. I've been doing a lot of research as well on 9/11, of course. One thing, there were 2 private investigators that I'm familiar with in Tampa, Florida, and I'm sure you're aware of this, based out of Tampa, Dan Grassi and Manuel Perez. They were charged with escorting one Saudi royal, one son of a Saudi army commander, and one another member of the Saudi royal family. Between 9/11 and 9/14, they escorted these men to aircraft in Florida. Let's see here. I think one also was Prince Ahmed bin Salman. Anyway, in that case, he worked he was at UC Irvine. He worked closely with bin Laden during the 80s, chairman of Saudi Arabian Research and Marketing Group and owner of some top racehorses. In fact, 1994 they won some thoroughbred awards or whatever. The Horse of the Year in 2001 was Point Given, I believe it was, owned by Saudi. I'm getting to this, or what I'm getting at is this. Between September 11th, after everything was, all the flights were grounded, the members of the bin Laden family were driven and are flown to Texas, escorted by these two private investigators in part, and then they all were flown to D.C. from Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Orlando, Dallas, Houston, Boston, Newark, and New York. What was going on at that time? So, I mean, we were told that they were, to avoid the backlash of the public, which there was none. But was there something else going on?
Oh, that's interesting. One of the things I have in the Freedom of Information Act data that I have is a PDF that lists everyone that was taken, the bin Laden family, and there was a lot of them. I'm going to guess close to 50 that were here, and royal family as well, that were here in the United States for various things. They were either visiting Las Vegas just because they were on vacation, or they were in college somewhere. And the PDF that I have actually tells where they were, what they were doing. They're in college, where it was, what state it was, and then how they were flown out of here. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Now, if bin Laden really was the mastermind of this and the planner who orchestrated this, why would we as a nation, and why would any military or any leader allow, not just fly them out, but allow them to leave this country and not hold them hostage till we got Osama bin Laden back? Well, obviously he didn't have anything to do with it. I also uncovered, not only did we leave this country, the first 72 hours after 9/11, when none of us could fly, the Saudi royal family, all of their members, at least 50 or so members of the bin Laden family, extended family, and it's a big family, were flown out of various cities in the United States home, and also 250 Israelis were flown out, I believe, New York City JFK on El Al, and they had a pretty full aircraft of these Mossad dancing Israelis, the guys from New Jersey, and they were never prosecuted. They went home to Israel and told Israeli television, you can find this on YouTube if you just look up five dancing Israelis, where they went back and they actually told the woman in New Jersey and the police and television in Israel that they were actually sent to New York to document the event.
Interesting.
That should be very telling. Now, why would we not keep bin Laden's family, some of his family members here as a hostage until he showed up, until he came and gave himself up? It doesn't make any sense except the fact that he had nothing to do with this. And to the day that he actually died, even the second time, and he died actually in December 26, 2001. And you'll remember the Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, the woman Prime Minister from Pakistan, was on, I believe, Charlie Rose and Fox News telling us that he actually died, and a week later she was assassinated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking. Joe and I were talking about that in advance of the show about bin Laden and about the when he actually died, and that of course brings up who and what was the alleged 2011 compound raid.
That was a suppression of the birth certificate.
Right.
If you remember, that was just a couple days into Donald Trump and a few other points of focus. And I remember very clearly when the announcement was going to be made, we didn't know what it was, and you called me, Dad. It was a Sunday night.
Yep.
And I just laughed as soon as I heard what they said they were announcing, because I think 8 times previously he was reported to be dead.
Yeah, and you know what, Rebekah, we early on, right after 9/11, we had formed a group of investigators, a ton of people in their field, and they volunteered their time to infiltrate Islamic or Arabic language message boards and Islamic terrorist, sympathetic terrorist message boards. And you know what? One of the biggest problems that we had as a group of investigators infiltrating these message boards is the longer we were there, after the further away from 9/11 that we were involved in this, we kept bumping into CIA and intelligence operatives, CIA and Mossad and MI6, posing as terrorists in these message groups. So I just thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the case every time they pick off somebody that they claim was, we've just thwarted a terror attack. It's always someone that the FBI's been grooming for 2 or 3 years. A lot of them are 19-year-olds, so they've been working with them, 15, 16 years old. And listen, if you're coming from a family where let's say maybe your mom is a single mother and she's working 2 or 3 jobs, and somebody comes up to you and says, if you deliver this package to the Christmas tree in Portland, for example, I'm going to give your mom, $1 million and she doesn't have to work so hard. It's real easy, especially if someone doesn't have a real, high IQ, or maybe really being not just naive as a young teenager. There's just, if you just look back when you were 15 or 16, how naive you were. And if you really love your mom, which most of us do, and somebody makes you a deal like that, and you don't even know they're with the FBI, it seems like that's the kind of stuff that all of these patsies are. TSA has not caught one terrorist in 14 years. But now we just found out that in Denver International that there's actually been a scam going on for these homosexual TSA agents to be allowed to fondle the manhood of what they think was a cute guy. So they had some sort of signal, and they got to do that. And there's some sexual perversion going on, and these are federal employees. People should be concerned about this, because if you don't let them do that, you will be tagged as a terrorist, and that's damn serious. That's serious stuff. They have that power.
Just as concerning as the lack of seriousness with the news takes when reporting this. I hear the laughing and the...
it's a big joke to them.
I mean, it really is. And it's...
Well, remember the guy, "Don't touch my junk"? He was serious. They were touching his junk. And so they did. They made a joke out of it. But you'll remember as we were coming through, Doug, I'm probably closer to your age than Joe's, but we're coming through. They used to do this with UFOs as well and make you look like you were a tinfoil hat wearer and just make fun of you if you saw something that was unidentified, whether you were a pilot, any kind of pilot. They just ridiculed you. Remember how they handled that? And it's still somewhat goes on today. But
well, in our hometown, I got to tell you, Rebecca, and ladies and gentlemen, in our hometown where we broadcast from, Erie, Pennsylvania, we've got something. It's Presque Isle. It's a peninsula that goes out into Lake Erie, and I do recall. I'm not sure the exact year, whether it was 67, 68. There was an incident that happened down on the peninsula, on one of the beaches at dusk, where this unidentified object, there's a light, it was seen. It was seen by a number of people. I'm going to say half a dozen people, and they were traumatized. The media reported on it. Initially, it was very serious, but then they and I, in fact, I still have the newspaper clippings on it. But then they said, look, it was absolutely nothing to worry about. Yet they had erected this. At the time, they sent the Navy, or not the Navy, but the Air Force. I'm sorry, Air Force investigators up to the peninsula, and they blocked off this huge area of the beach. They brought in these radioactive, the Geiger counter type things which were not small back then. And for I don't know, a dozen hours or so, they kept everyone away from this area. And this is in the middle of the summer, so I get that. I get that. How they, and then of course they said, nothing to worry about. So don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, right? That's
yeah, it's kind of like that Star Wars. These aren't the drones you're looking for. Same kind of thing. And if you start to look with your eyes wide open, which obviously happened to me when I got into this, I just started seeing everything in big print. And this, I refer to it as discernment. It's to me, I'm feeling kind of gifted in a sense, but that I can start to look at things and really dig through them and make logical sense out of them. And, you got to be careful not to get too full of fear because it'll upset your apple cart. Be aware and be prepared and watch things like this jade helm. Talk to people. You go down and talk to your sheriff if you're in one of these states or in one of these areas, or even if you're not. This may just be public for these 10 states. It may be going on in your state right now, and it's just not been made public as part of jade helm.
Exactly.
But it's a good idea to get to know who your sheriff is and to find out where he's at, because if he's with your constitution or not, it's important that you would know this. And they are usually elected officials, so it's a really good idea to make that relationship.
Absolutely. Wait a second. Let me grab this question here, or this question / comment. This from Robert. And Robert, thank you. Listening live in the United Kingdom, so it's kind of late there. Let me get this in. Regarding 9/11, Marvin Bush, director and stockholder of StraightSec, handled security for United Airlines, Dulles Airport, and World Trade Center. Also, partners with Michelle Al-Sabah and the co-investor with Marvin is Michelle Al-Sabah, the member of the Kuwaiti royal family. They were, of course, restored to power after Desert Storm. The same family who helped George H.W. Bush with Zapata oil, and the family of that young girl who testified at the United Nations about the incubators, which turned out to be a false story. The question is here, do you have any comments about this, and do you address this in your book?
I don't address this in the Methodical Illusion, but there's a lot of stuff that I didn't address in the Methodical Illusion that will come out in the sequel. But I do know all about Marvin Bush and his relation. And, there's this chit-chat chatter about 28 redacted pages that are pointing to the Saudi families. I went really deep down to this rabbit hole, and I tell people I took my 9/11 research all the way back to Babylon and then to the Garden of Eden, because it really does go back that deep. And then I came all the way back through history, looking at all of these players and connected Iran-Contra, Pan Am 103, the Trail of the Octopus, and all of these things are intertwined, and so are a lot of people. What I did not find were a lot of Saudis connected, except some of the royal families in Saudi and the Bin Laden family. The Bin Laden family owns a huge construction site company, and that construction company built a lot of our fast food joints, our McDonald's and Wendy's and all those things they follow our troops, by the way, and they build Air Force bases and landing strips and all of those things, hospitals, everything we tore down. The Bin Laden family construction company got a lot of contracts from the Bush family. Who I saw more connected in any of this was the entire Bush family was connected to lots of this. They were connected through their oil company to some Saudi and Kuwaitis. And, yes, that little girl did sit there and lie about the babies in the incubators. Marvin Bush and, was their cousin's name Stapleton or something along that line? There are several of the cousins involved. Pierce was in there, too, into the towers. But what I did find was FBI covering up for the CIA and the Mossad involvement, and a lot of Israeli involvement in this situation. The Bush family with the Mossad, the CIA. Of course, you remember George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA around the time of, I think he might have even been almost at the head of the CIA right after Kennedy's assassination. And I believe he was even in the Dealey Plaza on the day of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He forgets where he was, but I think a lot of people saw pictures of him there. So that would be George Bush Sr. They're actually kind of an interesting crime family if you study them. They are very connected, but there's not a lot of Saudis connected to anything that happened there as much as, let's say, the Israelis. For instance, the signers of the Project for a New American Century, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, they were all considered co-conspirators in the Jonathan Pollard spy case. He was a spy for Israel on the United States. Richard Pearl was actually arrested bringing secret documents into the Israeli embassy, and George W. Bush put them in high-ranking positions in his government or inside the Pentagon. And so the connections to the rabbi, the flight termination system, the Tri-Data company that got the blueprints, I mean, those connections go, almost every one of them, back to the state of Israel, unfortunately for them. And that is the truth, and that is the God's truth. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, indeed, that is the truth. And I could just see the emails coming in saying, "Well, you're anti-Semites." No. You know what? Look, folks, you've got bad intelligence. The rogue intelligence components in our CIA and Mossad and MI6 and everywhere else. So these are globalists. These aren't. That's not a matter of Jewish concern. Joe, go ahead.
All right, we got a few more calls. We're going to take those now. We'll go to area code 231. 231, you're up now. You're live with Rebekah Roth.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey,
Hi.
Rebekah, great work. All your statistical information is pretty much reiterating what I've heard in the past. Y'all heard of Leonard Ulrich. You've watched his videos and stuff with the Bush syndicate family. It's amazing, those people. Prescott Bush, the grandfather, his ties in the Senate, and, using tax dollars, American tax dollars, to fund Hitler. I mean, it's phenomenal what these people have done, and the facade they continue. It's everyone's like anesthetized who's not awake. It's amazing is what's going on. Absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, do you have a question for Rebekah at all, or?
No, not really. But I do have a question for you, Doug. Yesterday there was a tornado drill statewide in Michigan. Did you hear anything about that?
No, I didn't.
Really? Holy cow! I drive truck. I've called in once before, and I left Michigan Wednesday. I live in Traverse City, Northwest Michigan, and I came down here to Jersey. That's where I'm at right now. And there was a statewide tornado drill scheduled for Thursday, yesterday at 2 o'clock. And I heard it wasn't the only state. There was a couple other states involved. And I didn't get a lot of information on it, but I read it on the Internet. And I'm pretty awake. I'm pretty awake to all that's going on. And I'm just assuming, what's a statewide, how do you do a statewide tornado drill? What is that? Or does everybody run out a ditch or something? It's insane.
How many tornadoes do you guys get up there anyway?
I think it's a few.
I don't know what the average is, but, we're not like Illinois or Kansas,
Yeah.
At all. But, and then again, there's the Jade Helms situation where, there's 7 states in the Southwest, and that's, those numbers are trumped, and you've been hearing all these rumors and this and that, Ohio and Michigan, and, the recruitment of volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. So that was Tuesday. I read that and heard that, and I was, had a big lump in my throat because I know these things are coming. We all do, and so I live a mile and a half down the road from Camp Pugsley, which is a prison. So I left Wednesday to truck, and I came back by the house for a minute, and I parked in the road, and it's not unusual to see a cop car or two come down my road because I'm a mile and a half down the road from the prison. They transport prisoners, So. And I'm facing the east where the prison is up the road, and coming at me was a couple cop cars, and I'm parked out on the road in front of my house. So cops go by, it's not a big deal. And then a couple cars were coming, more cars were coming. There was another cop car. And then 2 more cars were coming. They were cop cars. And then 5 or 6 cop cars. And then 7 or 8 more of them. And then a rescue squad. And then about 7. I'm telling you, there were 25 to 30 cop cars coming from the prison, going back in towards town to go back to their post or whatever they were doing. So whatever they were doing, and I can't confirm this, but I mean, I live on a dead-end road, and the prison's at the other end for the most part. And, they were doing something at the prison. Well, and that was Wednesday. Yesterday was the drill. So, and I've been away from home, and I have no idea what's going on. But I'm just assuming, we're not that far from Camp Grayling. So, I think things are ratcheting up. I'm worried about, I got 8 grandchildren. So my concern is that I got 3 adult children, and I'm keeping them abreast, and they're pretty awake as well. But I was trying to get a hold of my daughter to say, look, you better sport over by the school to make sure there isn't a bunch of buses lined up over there hauling kids out for this tornado drill, because last year, if you guys remember, they did some sort of drill involving children in the Michigan area, northern Michigan area, and they took the kids without the parents' permission to Camp Grayling.
Yeah, I recall that there was a huge uproar over that by some of the parents who were not informed. That doesn't happen.
Well,
I'll tell you what, brother. We'll keep our eyes open, and we'll let you know what we find out. We'll make some inquiries about the statewide drill and also the movements. But thank you for your call. God bless, my friend. Stay safe out there traveling. All right.
Thanks. See ya.
All right, buddy. You know what, Rebekah? I mean, things seem to be ramping up, don't they? I mean, everywhere.
Well, yeah, and I get contacted by so many people that have a level of discernment. Like I'm saying, I feel like I almost say I'm psychic, but I wake up in the morning. Even if I wake up in the middle of the night, I grab my laptop and look to see if it started yet. I mean, and I have talked to lots of people that are doing the same thing. They check the television, or they check on their laptop before they even start their day, because they just feel like we're that close. And one of the things that I like to tell people is if the beast knows that we are aware of what they have planned, and they can't blame it on some innocent country this time, or in this case of 9/11, we've actually gone into almost a dozen Islamic countries and just bombed people on an illusion that was called 9/11. And so if we are aware and awake and we talk about it, the YouTube I made is called "Could This Be the Next False Flag?" And it's on my YouTube channel, and it's exactly what I discovered. And I wrote it into the book because I think that might be, and I just heard the politician talk about his state. He was in one of the Carolinas, I think. I didn't pay attention to him until I heard him talk about preparing his people for biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. And I'm like, what? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stopped putting my groceries away and I'm like, what the heck? Because I don't really watch the news except to see what they're trying to program us to think. So I'll turn it on just to see where they're going. And most of the time it's just pushing hate and fear of ISIS. Well, if we really feared ISIS, we'd shut that southern border now, wouldn't we? And the Jade Helm people would go to work right there along that long border between Texas and California. If they want to do something useful, then why don't they go to work protecting our nation? And now we've got people claiming that terrorists are right there 7 miles away. Well, if that's the case, why don't they do something about that? Is anybody else asking this besides me? I mean, doesn't it make logical sense instead of coming into Salt Lake or someplace like that, there's someplace in California, and scaring people half to death with their helicopter repelling into our neighborhoods, that they go to work and protect this country at our southern border? And especially since it's well known that our own media is claiming that ISIS is there. 7 miles is not very much of a distance.
No,
but
not
that's
at all.
because they want to be able to blame them for whatever they pull. And that's why they're doing this. That's why they keep that border wide open. They want to keep those drugs coming in. So a lot of us are medicated. If you're not drinking their fluoride in your water, maybe you're smoking their pot or snorting their coke or taking the heroin, because that's part of the whole war on drugs is to keep us drugged. Very
I like
successful at it too.
The ice water and TV staring. That's my vice there.
Yeah, I got. Okay, let me ask this question if I can, because a lot of people seem to be feeling this way. And Rebekah, I know that. I know how things get. This is a question or a comment from Jennifer. I just like you to kind of address this, if you would. The subject line reads numb, as in I'm numb, okay? And the message is this. It seems as if there is an event almost daily. It seems like I get worn out, that people like me seem to go numb and exhausted. I wonder if that's the object to this, too. And she writes, my brothers and brother-in-law have gotten to this long ago, and they don't even want to hear about it. And after a while, I have to agree. Are we being worn? Are we being worn down purposely? By events, or being kept on the edge of our seat?
Well, remember, I think we talked about this last show. Humans are easily brainwashed if you're living in fear. And if you're in shock and awe, remember the term shock and awe when we took down Baghdad? When you're traumatized, whether it's through a physical beating or emotional beating like we saw on the TV on 9/11, horrified. Come on, we watched the United States Pentagon, the most heavily protected building in the entire planet, be struck by what we thought was an airplane, or told was an airplane, a missile or some such thing, but attacked. And we couldn't do anything about it as a nation, as a military. We saw NORAD fail to scramble for 4 hijacked jets. They should have scrambled airplanes in 6 minutes or less. We watched all that, and guess what happened to us? We all felt filleted and very, very vulnerable and scared, because that's where they wanted us, because then we would believe anything they told us. We would believe Osama bin Laden did this from a cave in Afghanistan. We wouldn't think logically. And honest to God, I did not myself think logically until I found out those hijackers were still alive when I went to write a novel. And that started my road down this investigation. I was right where other people are and maybe were, and maybe I questioned it, but I didn't have the guts to go look. And I think that there's a lot of brainwashing and programming going on, and so that's why I think you see this stuff. And to a degree, it does make you complacent, and it makes you feel. There's another frequency that we can get into. It's called fear, and it leads to anxiety. And so when you have living in fear and anger and hate and anxiety, man, you're in that lower vibration. That's not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus is only talking about love, acceptance, and joy and peace. Now remember his mission. Remember what he was all about. Those are the vibrations that he is all about, and that's where we need to be, to rise up out of that fear, because you're very easily programmed in fear. And when you're standing in the strength of the love of Jesus Christ, you have that joy and you have that peace that nobody can push you over. And that's where you want to go. That's where you want to stay. And if they have you down there where you're having anxiety and hating other people, or hating religions that you are not a part of or don't know, and living in fear and anger, then the devil has won you over. So you need to get with the program here and get to where Jesus was pushing you to go, and that is in joy and love and peace. Those are the three highest vibrations you can experience.
Fear only hinders our own personal journey. It's not going to change any dangers or situations we find ourselves in. It will only cloud our judgment. And regardless of the level of anxiety and fear we do have, to the highest degree, where it makes physical manifestations, to the littlest worry in the back of your mind, none of it makes any of a difference. Use that energy and thought focus into knowing and praying to the Lord that regardless of what happens, that he will use this situations for his purposes to bring about his will and save as many people as possible.
Amen. That's correct. Mm-hmm. And folks, what Rebekah's talking about, when we talk about vibrations, and Paul McGuire, and folks, you've heard Paul McGuire talk. We talk about DNA and the harmonics, and there is something about communication. Once you're saved, the harmonics of your DNA are extremely they're changed, and it's important, and I think that people have to understand that. That's what I think, Rebekah. I think that's what you're referring to about the vibrations.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
Exactly. And one of the things I also wanted to talk about when that caller called in about that, talking about the prison area, I've been contacted by someone, and someone in your audience might be aware of this too, that in West Virginia, some towns there have been working overtime and being told to make preparations for evacuations out of D.C. And I don't have any dates or any other information other than it's a FEMA-funded overtime situation for these city employees.
Wow.
And that's just something, these are the things that people contact me with now, just that they think it's odd and it's weird and it's kind of something to think about and a heads up. And so, but one thing I want to say before I forget is my new tagline is the pit bull for Jesus.
I like that.
I liked that. I was taking notes when you were talking. It's kind of a pit bull. I'm like, yeah, I kind of am a pit bull. Pit bull for Jesus.
There you go.
But another thing, so just to mention this, I know we're running short on time, but a lot of people think, and a lot of people say this to me, that most people are not awake. I think that's a misnomer. I think that people are waking up. A lot more people are awake than what we think, and maybe we're just being led to believe that people aren't awake and they aren't willing to fight for this country and to stand up for what's right. And that a lot of people don't pray. They do pray, and those prayers do have a lot of power. And so I don't think that you're in the minority. I think actually now, especially after the last time I did your show, I think we're in a huge majority, those of us that are awake, aware, and in Christ.
Wow. I got to tell you, I know that you're changing the minds and hearts, and I hope we are as well, of people, and changing the direction in being vessels of information to help people prepare, and practically as well as spiritually. We've got about 60 seconds left. I can't believe how quickly the time went. Rebekah, 60 seconds. Go ahead and take us out. Anything you want, you have closing comments, final words. It's to you.
Well, I'll just invite everyone to go to my website. It's just www.methodicalillusion.com. There you can follow me on Facebook and join me on Facebook. And you can buy an autographed copy of the Methodical Illusion in about 10 days or so, maybe less. A hardback will be available for purchase on Amazon and also autographed through the website as well. I think the price on the hardcover is $26.95. It just costs more to do that. And then once that comes out, the Kindle is also in second edition. The hardback is going to be second edition. And then I'll pull the softback off, and it'll be offline for about 3 days before they can get the second edition and the softback up there. There you can read the first 3 chapters of the book online on the website as well. So if you order it from any source, you can go ahead and start reading the character development in the first 3 chapters online for free and get yourself all ready to go and get your seatbelts oiled up and ready to fasten on.
Well, Rebekah, thank you so very much for your gift of time tonight, and you're just such a gracious guest and wonderful guest, full of information, and I just want to say thank you, and please, please, please be safe, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, God bless you. Folks, that'll do it for us tonight. Rebekah Roth, methodicalillusion.com. Please bookmark her website and send her a little email saying that you heard her and on our program, and, of course, Methodical Illusion, good for your library. God bless everyone. Until Monday, stay safe.